Rosa Merriweather slammed the coffee pot down so hard, the ceramic split against the wood, and every man in that private dining room stopped breathing. Callum Rourke's hand was 1 inch from the pen. 1 inch from signing away everything he had built. She had heard the German, every word. And she had heard what Shaw translated instead, a smooth, practiced lie delivered with the confidence of a man who had done this before and expected to do it again. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was not. "Mr. Rourke, don't sign that contract. Your interpreter just lied to both of you. If you have ever been the woman in the room that nobody thought mattered, the one they looked through, the one they talked over, the one they dismissed before she ever opened her mouth, then stay with me. Because what happens next in that dining room is something none of those men ever forgot." Subscribe to this channel right now. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and follow this story all the way to the end. You are going to want to see how this finishes. The Frontier House Hotel had a way of reminding Rosa Merriweather exactly where she stood in the world, and it didn't need to be cruel about it. Elegant establishments rarely did. They communicated hierarchy through architecture, through arrangement, through the careful geography of who sat and who stood, and whose name appeared in the leather guest register versus whose name appeared on a weekly payslip. Rosa's name was on a payslip. She had accepted that a long time ago. She was good at her work, genuinely good in ways that nobody who signed her payslip had ever thought to acknowledge out loud. She kept the dining room running with a quiet, unbroken precision that the head steward claimed credit for every single week without embarrassment. She remembered which guests took their coffee, black, and which ones needed cream, brought separately without being asked twice. She caught arithmetic errors in the weekly supply invoices that would have cost the hotel real money, corrected them without drawing attention to herself, and filed the amended totals without expecting thanks. She was punctual. She was careful. She was honest. She was invisible. That last part was not an accident. Rosa had learned early the way most women of her particular size and station learned early through enough painful repetitions to make the lesson permanent. That visibility was a dangerous thing when you couldn't control what people decided to see. And what people decided to see when they looked at Rosa Merriweather was a large woman, a heavy woman, a woman whose figure did not conform to what the Eastern fashion magazines suggested a woman's figure ought to be. Round face, strong arms, full through the hips and shoulders, chestnut hair pinned practically back, plain working clothes, sensible shoes, the kind of woman that certain men in certain rooms looked through the way they looked through furniture, noting the presence, registering the function, seeing nothing further. What they didn't see was the 12-year-old girl bent over German livestock invoices at her father's kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, lamplight pooling yellow on the pages, her father's voice, patient and precise, beside her ear. "Read it again, Rosa. The first reading is for vocabulary. The second reading is for structure. The third reading is for what they're not saying." What they didn't see was 15 years of commercial correspondence, cattle contracts, freight invoices, banking agreements, legal letters processed in English and German and workable French for immigrant merchants who couldn't afford a proper professional and trusted her father's reputation and later her own. What they didn't see was a mind that could hear a German conditional clause and parse it for commercial implication in the space of a single breath, that understood the difference between what a contract said and what a contract meant, that had learned from a very young age that the space between those two things was exactly where dishonest men built their fortunes. They saw the coffee pot. Rosa had made a kind of peace with that. Not a happy peace. The kind of peace that let you get out of bed in the morning without letting the weight of other people's assumptions flatten you before noon. That peace lasted right up until the afternoon of August 14th, 1887, when Percival Shaw looked her body up and down, curled his lip, and said what he said in front of 6 men who laughed because Shaw was laughing, and powerful men's laughter is contagious in enclosed rooms. She had knocked on this private dining room door at precisely 3:15, scheduled time for the second coffee service. Coffee, hot cream, cold sugar, tongs clean. She knocked twice, waited the appropriate interval, and entered. The room held the particular kind of tension that large money creates. Shoulders, pulled back, voices lower than normal, hands flat on the table rather than moving freely. A leather portfolio lay open at the center. Papers everywhere. Two men she didn't recognize with the pressed look of lawyers. Friedrich Adler, at the far end. A compact, precise German-American man with steel-rimmed spectacles and the bearing of someone who had accumulated wealth carefully over decades and intended to be equally careful now. Two of Callum's ranch foremen along one wall, and Callum Rourke at the head of the table. Rosa had seen Callum Rourke at the hotel before. Most people in Cheyenne County had some awareness of him. Red Willow Ranch was not a small operation. He was a tall man, dark-haired, with the kind of face that weather and sustained physical work had made interesting rather than simply handsome. Deeply tanned. Lines at the corners of eyes that spent a lot of time squinting at distances. Hands that belonged to a man who worked his own land rather than merely owning it. He held himself the way genuinely confident men held themselves without performance, without the need to take up extra space to prove the space was his. He had never spoken directly to Rosa in any of their previous encounters in this hotel, but he had also never done what so many guests did, which was look past her the way you look past a lamp or a side table. He glanced up when she entered. A brief, neutral glance. Then his attention returned to the papers. Percival Shaw's attention did not return to the papers. Shaw was Callum's business interpreter and commercial advisor. Rosa had formed her assessment of him across several previous encounters, enough to know the type precisely. The kind of man who used other people's resources to construct his own importance. Handsome in a finished, deliberate way, like something lacquered to a shine. His suit cost more than 2 months of Rosa's wages. He sat to Callum's immediate right, with the posture of a man who considered that positioning a statement. He watched Rosa cross to the sideboard with an expression she had been receiving from men like him for her entire adult life. The expression that categorizes in the first 2 seconds. That decides on visual evidence alone what a person is and what she is not, and what category she permanently belongs in. A verdict delivered by the eyes and considered final, requiring no further information and admitting no appeal. Rosa set the coffee service down without looking at him. She began refilling cups. Quietly, efficiently. She was halfway around the table when Shaw spoke. Rourke. His voice was easy conversational. The tone of a man making a small joke among men who would appreciate it. A negotiation of this magnitude deserves better staff, don't you think? He let his gaze travel the full length of Rosa's figure slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you want everyone in the room to see that you're doing it. Something more appropriate to the occasion. One of the lawyers produced a polite chuckle. One of Friedrich's men smiled without looking up. One of Callum's foremen stared at the wall. Rosa did not stop pouring coffee. A woman of her... Shaw paused, theatrical, searching for the precise word. Proportions belongs near the kitchen. Not in rooms where serious men are making serious decisions. Laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. The particular social laughter of men who don't find something genuinely funny, but recognize that the powerful man in the room has made a joke, and that silence in that moment costs more than they want to spend. Rosa's hands were steady. That was a learned skill, not a natural one. Hands steady, face composed, eyes down. Let it pass through you. She was almost done. 40 more seconds, and she could leave this room and not think about Percival Shaw's expression again until it showed up in her sleep, as it inevitably would. 40 more seconds. Then Friedrich Adler spoke. He spoke in German to his own representative. A rapid, quietly urgent sentence, the kind of sentence a man produces when he has understood something alarming in the middle of a conversation and cannot wait for the appropriate moment to address it. Rosa's hands went completely still, because she understood every single word. Friedrich had said, "Wenn Rourke die Wasserrechte bereits an die Eisenbahn abgetreten hat, gibt es keine Ranch mehr, in die wir investieren könnten." If Rourke has already surrendered the water rights to the railroad, there is no ranch left for us to invest in. Rosa stood with the coffee pot in her hand and let the sentence settle into her understanding the way cold water settles into dry ground. Then she did what her father had trained her to do. She parsed it once for vocabulary, once for grammatical structure, once for commercial implication. She parsed it 3 times. The meaning did not change. She looked at Shaw. Shaw had heard it. Of course he had. He was the interpreter. Translating Friedrich Adler's statements was his only reason for being in this room. Rosa watched his face and identified the exact moment she would later describe to Callum as the moment she knew a microscopic pause, an infinitesimal internal adjustment, the nearly invisible recalculation of a man selecting which version of the truth he intended to produce. Shaw turned toward Callum. "Mr. Adler says," he announced in the smooth, unhurried register of a man who has rehearsed this, "that the water provisions are completely satisfactory to the German party." The cold moved through Rosa's chest like a hand reaching in. That was not mistranslation. Mistranslation was when an unfamiliar idiom produced an imprecise English equivalent. Mistranslation was what happened when regional German dialect encountered a translator with an insufficient vocabulary. What Shaw had just done, taking a sentence about surrendered water rights and a destroyed investment and producing completely satisfactory, was not a mistake. It was a performance. Executed with precision, delivered without hesitation, in a room full of men who had no reason to question him. She stood there. She thought about the payslip. She thought about the 7 years of hiring managers who had made their decision before she finished her first sentence. She thought about what it had cost her in patience, in endurance, in swallowed pride, to hold this job in this hotel without incident. Then Callum's hand moved toward the pen. Rosa put the coffee pot down. The ceramic cracked against the table's edge, sharper than she intended, a sound like a small gunshot in a quiet room, and every man in that dining room turned to look at her, and Rosa Merriweather, who had spent her entire life perfecting the art of invisibility, stood in the sudden silence and spoke. "Mr. Rourke, don't sign that contract." 4 words, normal volume. The room was quiet enough that she didn't need more. Every man stared at her. Shaw recovered in under 2 seconds. That was his gift, the speed of his recovery. He rearranged his face into something between amusement and practiced contempt, and said in the tone adults use with children who have wandered into formal proceedings, "Well, it appears our dining room girl has opinions about international commercial agreements." "Rosa." The head steward's voice from the doorway she hadn't noticed him appear in. "Rosa, that's enough. Please finish the, 'Your interpreter just lied to you.'" She was not looking at the steward. She was looking at Callum, only at Callum, because he was the only person in this room who mattered right now, and she had approximately 15 seconds before she lost the floor entirely. "He lied to both of you." The second silence was different from the first. The first had been surprise. This one was calculation men, measuring the situation, weighing her against the room, deciding what category of problem she was and what it would require to resolve her. Shaw laughed, a rich dismissive sound with practice behind it. "She has misunderstood something which is entirely understandable, given that she carries dishes for a living, and she has embarrassed herself in front of," Mr. Adler said. Rosa turned toward Friedrich Adler. She said it in German, first exactly his words, exactly his inflection, precisely reproduced. She watched his face. She watched the astonishment move across it like a fast storm across flat country, open and unmistakable and impossible to misread. Friedrich Adler removed his spectacles. He set them on the table with extreme care. He looked at Rosa with the expression of a man who has been sitting in a burning building for several minutes without knowing it was on fire, and has just been handed that information by the one person who noticed the smoke. "This," he said in careful accented English, each word deliberate, "is exactly what I said. Not a question. Not an approximation. Exactly what I said." The room held its breath. Down the hallway, somewhere in the main hotel, a door closed. The sound drifted through the walls and died. Nobody at the table moved. Callum Rourke set the pen down. He had not signed. His hand had been inches from that paper, and he had set the pen down, and he was looking at Rosa with an expression she had not encountered from a man like him in a room like this. Not embarrassment at the interruption. Not the managed tolerance of a man handling an awkward social situation. He was looking at her the way a man looks when the ground beneath him has just shifted, and he is recalculating everything quickly, seriously, without wasted motion. "Shaw." Callum's voice was quiet, controlled. the kind of quiet that has nothing to do with softness. Step back from the table. Callum, this is absurd. The woman clearly. Step back. Shaw stepped back. Callum looked at Rosa. He looked at her directly, not the preliminary assessment of her figure, not the social calibration that usually preceded any genuine attention a man like him paid to a woman in her position. He looked at her face, her eyes. "Can you translate everything that's been said in German in this room this afternoon?" he said. "Yes," Rosa said. "Everything." Callum reached to his left and pulled out a chair. It was the chair his legal advisor had vacated 20 minutes earlier to retrieve documents from the adjoining room. An empty chair at a table full of powerful men, a chair that had belonged to a man with credentials, a man whose right to occupy that space nobody had questioned for a single second. "Sit down," Callum said. An audible breath somewhere around the table. Rosa looked at the chair. She looked at the documents spread across the table, and the men positioned around them, and the leather portfolio at the center, with Callum's unsigned name waiting at the bottom of the last page. She pulled her apron off, folded it over her arm, sat down. Shaw made a sound that wasn't a word. One of the lawyers examined the ceiling. Friedrich Adler watched Rosa with an expression that might she thought have been approval. "Miss," Callum began. "Merriweather," she said. "Rosalie Merriweather." He said her name back to her like a man who intended to remember it. "Miss Merriweather, I need you to start from the beginning. Every German phrase spoken in this room today. Take whatever time you need." "I'll need paper," Rosa said. "And something to write with. I make notes as I translate. It's how I maintain accuracy." Callum nodded at the nearest foreman who left and returned inside of 90 seconds with a writing pad and 2 sharpened pencils and set them in front of Rosa without a word, with the focused efficiency of a man who understood that this had just become the most important task in the room. Rosa picked up a pencil. She started from the beginning. She moved through the afternoon's German chronologically, every phrase Friedrich had spoken since entering the room, every exchange with his representatives, every aside, every clarification. She provided accurate English equivalents, and where the commercial implications required it, a brief explanatory note. Precise. Methodical. The way her father had taught her. The way she had always done it at kitchen tables by lamplight for merchants who needed to know exactly what their contracts actually said. By the time she reached the water rights statement, 2 of the men at the table had gone pale. By the time she reached the end of her account, Callum had not looked away from her once. Shaw tried to interrupt 4 times. The first time, Callum silenced him with a look that required no words. The second time, one of the foremen moved from the wall to a position between Shaw and the table that communicated everything necessary without anything being said. The third and fourth times, Shaw read the room correctly and stayed quiet. When Rosa finished, Friedrich sat very still with his hands flat on the table and the compressed, disciplined fury of a man who is genuinely angry and has decided that the way he expresses that anger will be measured and precise and more effective for being so. "Mr. Adler," Callum said, "do you want to verify what Miss Merriweather has translated?" "I do not need to verify it," Friedrich said. He did not look at Callum when he said it. He was looking at Shaw. "She has reproduced my words exactly, every one." He paused. "I have been wondering for 3 days why you and I keep arriving at the same confusions, despite addressing them directly. I believe I now understand the reason." Shaw opened his mouth. "Don't," Callum said. Shaw closed it. Callum leaned back. He looked at the portfolio in the center of the table, the agreement he had been 45 minutes from signing, the agreement that would have moved his water rights into the hands of a holding company through a process he had not understood, because the man translating it for him had been ensuring he wouldn't. "Miss Merriweather," he said, "I need you to go through every document in that portfolio. Everything. I need to know what they actually say." "That will take time," Rosa said. "We have time," he said. Rosa opened the portfolio to page 1. The leather portfolio was 37 pages. She read every one with the methodical attention she had developed over 15 years, line by line, clause by clause, checking each language version against the other, noting every discrepancy in 3 clean columns: original German text, accurate English, equivalent, commercial implication. The transportation fees were wrong. The English version showed a fixed rate. The German version embedded a percentage adjustment tied to an index defined nowhere in the documents she had been given, which meant it could be defined anywhere else by anyone to mean almost anything. They needed it to mean at the time they needed it to mean it. She said so, precisely, without softening. Callum said something under his breath and then apologized immediately. "Don't," Rosa said. It warranted it. Something shifted in his expression. A small thing, but she noticed it. She moved to the winter feed obligations. The German version contained an entire clause absent from the English version entirely, a requirement that Red Willow Ranch supply additional feedstock to a transportation subsidiary during what the German document called periods of corridor establishment. She had to read it twice and diagram it on the writing pad before she was satisfied she could explain it clearly enough for Callum to understand its full practical meaning. He understood. The color left his face when he did. Friedrich was making his own parallel notes now, his German accounting, running alongside Rosa's English one, two independent records being constructed simultaneously at the same table that would prove extremely difficult for anyone to credibly challenge later. She moved to the grazing boundaries. Found an acreage discrepancy that would in practice exclude a section of Red Willow land from partnership protections while still holding it under partnership obligations. That one she had to diagram twice before she was satisfied the explanation was complete and accurate. Shaw had not moved from his position near the wall. He had not spoken. He stood very still with the expression of a man watching a fire. He can't put out and calculating what if anything remains salvageable. Then Rosa turned to page 24. She read it once. She read it again. She sat with the page longer than she had sat with any other in the portfolio, because what she was reading required absolute certainty before she named it out loud, because if she was right about what she was reading, this was not about discrepancies or drafting inconsistencies or the commercial inexactitudes of imprecise translation. This was deliberate fraud. Page 24 contained a clause written in German granting a company called the Western Continental Holdings Corporation authority to assume operational control of all water access along Red Willow Ranch's eastern boundary, in the event the ranch failed to make any single scheduled partnership payment within a 30-day window. The German was careful and layered the kind of language designed to look like standard financial protection on a first reading designed to read as boilerplate to anyone who trusted the man translating it for them. It was not boilerplate, because Western Continental Holdings Corporation was not Friedrich Adler's company. Rosa had been listening carefully enough across 3 hours to know every name associated with Friedrich's business entities. They were all present in the English documents clearly identified, fully named. Western Continental Holdings Corporation appeared in none of them. "Mr. Rourke," Rosa said. He looked at her immediately. She had noticed that about him across the past 3 hours when she spoke, he listened. Not in the managed way of a man performing attentiveness. He actually stopped and listened the way her father had always listened when she read him something significant, like the words mattered more than whatever else was happening in his head. "Do you know a company called the Western Continental Holdings Corporation?" The room changed. It was subtle and immediate and impossible to miss. If you were paying attention, a shift in the air, a shift in the quality of the silence, the particular stillness that descends on a room when something that has been concealed suddenly becomes visible. She did not look toward the wall where Shaw was standing. She kept her eyes on Callum. His expression had gone very still. "Where did you read that?" "Page 24, Rosa said. "The German version only. The corresponding English page describes the same clause, but replaces the specific company name with the phrase, 'the partnership's financial trustee.' The German text names them directly. Western Continental Holdings Corporation." Friedrich's voice in German was short and sharp. Then he said it in English without being asked, "I have never heard of this company." Nobody was looking at the documents anymore. Every man in the room was looking at Shaw. Shaw had gone the particular still of a man whose calculations have just reached a result he doesn't like. The surface of him, the lacquered finish, the practiced ease had developed a hairline crack. Nothing dramatic, But Rosa could see it the way you can see a crack in plaster that isn't wide enough yet to let in light, but is wide enough to tell you the wall is moving. Shaw. Callum stood. A tall man standing in a room he owns is a different kind of tall. Who is Western Continental Holdings Corporation? A legitimate financial entity, Shaw said. The ease in his voice was still present, but had thinned like ice in late February. Still there, still covering the surface, but changed in character in ways that matter. Standard investor protection in arrangements of this. Whose entity? Not a question. Friedrich's people don't know it. It doesn't appear in the English documents my legal team reviewed. It appears exclusively in the German version that passed through your hands and no one else's. Callum's voice had gone to its quietest register now, and in that register, it had the quality of something final. I'm asking you one more time. Whose entity is it? The silence that followed was long. Shaw said nothing. Get out of this room, Callum said. Right now. You don't touch those documents. You don't touch anything on that table. You walk out that door and you wait. Shaw looked at him for a moment, a long moment, with something complicated moving behind his eyes that Rosa filed away carefully, because a man like Shaw didn't accept a reversal like this without recalculating. He was already planning. Whatever his next move was, he was already shaping it. Then he walked out. The door closed. Callum remained standing for a moment, looking at the closed door. Then he turned back to the table, back to Rosa. He sat down. He pulled the writing pad toward him and picked up his own pen. Not the signing pen, a different one, and looked at Rosa with the focused attention of a man who has just identified the only solid ground available and intends to stand on it. All right, he said. We go through everything Shaw has ever handled for me. Not just this portfolio. Every German correspondence. Every freight contract. Every telegram related to the Adler partnership. How long will that take? I don't know until I've seen the volume of material, Rosa said. But I can tell you now that if the pattern on page 24 is intentional rather than incidental, you'll find it elsewhere. Men who build this kind of framework don't build it in one document. Callum held her gaze for a moment. You've seen this kind of thing before. My father translated commercial contracts for 30 years, Rosa said. I've seen what deliberate discrepancy looks like versus accidental discrepancy. This is not accidental. Friedrich had been listening. He set his pen down and looked at Rosa across the table with an expression that was direct and without social performance of any kind. The expression of a man who communicates plainly and expects the same. Miss Merriweather, he said. I have been in this city for 4 days. I have met with representatives from 4 different ranching operations seeking partnership investment. In 3 of those meetings, I did not fully understand what was being communicated to me across the table. He paused. In this meeting for the first time I do. Another pause. That is not a small thing. Rosa did not deflect it. Her father had taught her that too. When someone accurately identifies what you have done, you do not argue with them out of misplaced modesty. You acknowledge it, and you keep working. I understand, she said. She turned to the next page of documents. They worked until the lamps were lit, and the daylight outside the windows had gone amber, and then dark. The lawyers came and went. Friedrich's representatives conferred in the corner. Callum sat to Rosa's left and listened to everything she said with the consistent, uninterrupted attention of a man who understood he was in the presence of the only accurate information he'd received in weeks. He never asked her to simplify. He never looked impatient when precision required an extra moment. He did not treat her thoroughness as an inconvenience. He treated it as exactly what it was, the difference between knowing what his contracts actually said and believing whatever Shaw had decided to tell him. When she finished, the table was covered in her handwritten notes. 3 columns, 37 pages. Every discrepancy documented and dated and explained. Friedrich looked at the notes for a long time. Then he looked at Rosa. Where have you been working? He asked. Before today. Here, Rosa said. Dining room. Bookkeeping assistants. Friedrich looked at Callum. Something passed between the 2 men, a recognition, a shared recalibration, the adjustment of men who have just discovered that the room they are sitting in, has been different from what they thought it was for considerably longer than this afternoon. Callum walked Rosa out himself when the meeting concluded through the lobby to the service entrance she used by habit. He stopped at the door in the evening air and looked at her. "I need to go back through everything Shaw has handled in the past 18 months, he said. "All of it. That's significant work, Miss Merriweather." "Yes," she said. "It would be. I can't do it without someone who reads German." "No," she agreed. "You can't." Howe was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to offer you that work. Proper engagement, proper pay. Not—" He stopped, looked at her carefully. "I want to be clear that this is not about this afternoon. This is about the work I need done, and the fact that you are the only person I have encountered today who has demonstrated the ability to do it." Rosa looked at him. In the lamplight, she could see the tiredness in him and the tension that hadn't left his jaw since she put the coffee pot down, and underneath those things, something that was simply and plainly respect, not performed, not strategic, just genuine. "We can discuss terms tomorrow," she said. "I'll need to know what records you have where they're held and what your timeline is. Then I'll give you a number." "Name a fair number and I'll meet it," he said. "I'll name a fair number," she said, "and you'll tell me whether it's acceptable, and we'll come to an agreement from there." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to make any of this easy, are you?" Rosa looked at him steadily. "Mr. Rourke," she said, "neither are you." He held the door. She walked out into the Wyoming evening crickets, starting up in the dark stars coming out one by one above the street, the air cooler than it had been at 3:15 when she knocked on that private dining room door with a coffee pot and 40 more seconds between herself and a clean exit. She had not gotten the clean exit. Instead, she had gotten something she hadn't had in a very long time, work that used the full reach of what she actually was, and somewhere behind her in the city. Percival Shaw was in a room by himself, and he was not accepting what had happened this afternoon as a conclusion. Men like Shaw never did. They accepted reversals as problems to be re-engineered, situations to be restructured from a different angle, outcomes to be overturned by a different method. He had walked out of that dining room with the original German contract. Rosa didn't know that yet, but she would. She walked the 3 blocks to her boarding house with her back straight and the writing pad under her arm, and the Wyoming stars burning cold and brilliant above her. Her position at the Frontier House was almost certainly not what it had been this morning. The head steward's expression when she finally emerged had communicated that clearly enough. She would deal with that when she had to. Right now she had documented evidence, a meeting tomorrow morning, and the particular exhausted clarity of a person who has done something irreversible and knows without being able to fully articulate why that the irreversibility was the point. She had walked into that room carrying coffee. She had walked out carrying the only honest record of what had been said in it. And Shaw still had the original German contract, which meant this was nowhere near finished. Shaw took the original German contract when he left that room. Rosa didn't find out until the next morning. She arrived at Red Willow Ranch's Cheyenne office at 8 o'clock sharp, writing pad under her arm, dressed in the best clothes she owned, which were not impressive by any standard the men in that building would apply, but were clean and pressed, and hers. The ranch foreman, who had placed the pencils in front of her the previous afternoon, met her at the door and brought her through without ceremony, which she appreciated. She did not need ceremony. She needed the records. Callum was already at his desk when she entered. He looked like a man who had not slept. He stood when she came in, a reflex automatic, the kind of manners that had been trained into him young enough to be genuine, and gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit down, Miss Merriweather," he said. "There's something you need to know before we start." Rosa sat. She placed her writing pad on her knee and looked at him and waited. "Shaw is gone," Callum said. "Left the hotel last night. Took the room he was staying in apart before he left, cleaned it out, left nothing. And the original German contract, the one Friedrich brought from Hamburg, the one with his firm's official seal on every page." He stopped. His jaw worked once. "Shaw had it in his portfolio. He took it with him." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Does Friedrich know?" "I sent word this morning. He's coming here at 10. Callum looked at her. "Without that document, we have no baseline to compare against what Shaw constructed." Whatever discrepancies you documented last night without the original, a sharp enough lawyer can argue your notes are interpretation, not evidence. My notes are accurate, Rosa said. I believe you, Callum said. I need a judge to believe you. She understood the distinction. She had grown up around enough commercial correspondence to know exactly how much the word of an unaccredited female hotel worker weighed against the word of a credentialed professional interpreter in a formal proceeding. She understood it without bitterness, the way you understand weather, not because you accept it as just, but because you accept it as real. Then we find another way to corroborate, she said. Shaw couldn't have built this alone. A scheme this layered two language versions, a phantom holding company, embedded in the German text, coordinated across multiple documents. He needed someone feeding him information about Red Willow Ranch's financial position. Someone who knew exactly when and how the partnership payment schedule would create vulnerability. Callum was very still. You're saying someone inside the operation. I'm saying someone with access to your financial records, Rosa said carefully. That's not necessarily inside the operation. That could be a bank, a telegraph office. Anyone who handled correspondence between you and Friedrich's representatives before Shaw translated it. Callum stood up. He moved to the filing cabinet against the far wall, a tall, heavy thing with 4 deep drawers, and pulled the top one open. Everything from the past 18 months, he said. Every German letter, every freight record, every telegraph involving the Adler negotiation. He turned to look at her. Can you tell from reading them whether they've been tampered with? I can tell whether what I'm reading matches what Friedrich would have intended to write, Rosa said. Bring them here. He brought them. A substantial stack, more than she had expected, though not more than she could handle. She had worked through larger volumes for her father on nights when a merchant's entire seasonal contract depended on a correct reading. She organized the documents by date, spread them across the desk in chronological order, and began. She read for 40 minutes without speaking. Callum sat on the other side of the desk and worked through his own papers, account books, ranch records, things that needed attention, regardless of what was happening in Cheyenne with Percival Shaw. He did not hover. He did not ask her how much longer it would take. He gave her the silence that the work required and occupied himself usefully within it, and Rosa, who was accustomed to being managed and supervised and second-guessed in everything she did. That mattered, noticed the absence of those things. The way you notice the absence of a sound you had stopped consciously registering, but which had been there all along. Then she stopped on a letter dated 4 months prior. She read it twice. 3 times. Mr. Rourke, she said. He looked up immediately. This letter. She held it toward him. In German, Friedrich is asking whether you've resolved what he calls the Eastern Water Question. He uses a specific phrase, die östliche Wasserfrage, that in German commercial correspondence of this period refers specifically to a water rights boundary dispute requiring legal resolution before a partnership can be formalized. She set it on the desk between them. The English translation Shaw provided you, do you have it? Callum opened a separate folder and found it in under a minute, which told Rosa he had organized his records carefully, which told her something about the kind of man he was. He placed it beside the German original. Rosa looked at Shaw's English version. Shaw told you Friedrich was asking whether you'd finalized the Eastern grazing arrangements, she said. Callum stared at the 2 documents. Water rights, he said, versus grazing arrangements. Yes. He asked me about the water rights 4 months ago. Callum's voice had gone very flat, the flatness of controlled anger which Rosa had come to recognize as more dangerous than volume. And I told him through Shaw that there were no water issues. Everything was settled. Because as far as I knew, everything was settled. No one had told me there was a question about it. Because Shaw didn't translate the question, Rosa said. He replaced it. The silence in the room was heavy and purposeful. He's been managing this for 4 months, Callum said. At minimum, Rosa said. Keep looking. If it started 4 months ago, it started somewhere. They went back through the correspondence together. Rosa translating aloud, and Callum cross-referencing against Shaw's written versions, building a parallel timeline of what Friedrich had actually said versus what Callum had been told Friedrich said. It was painstaking work, And it was also, Rosa thought, the most useful thing she had done in years. Not because the work was new to her, but because the work mattered in a way that had real stakes, real consequences, a real person sitting across from her, whose future depended on getting it right. By the time Friedrich arrived at 10 o'clock, they had identified 7 separate instances of deliberate mistranslation across 4 months of correspondence. 7 moments at which Callum and Friedrich had each been steered by the same pair of hands away from understanding and toward the specific misunderstanding that the Western Continental Holdings Corporation required them to have. Friedrich came in with his representative and his attorney, and the particular compressed fury of a man who has spent the night confirming his worst suspicions through the only method available to him. Sitting alone in a hotel room, reviewing everything he thought he knew, finding the seams. "You have the original contract," were the first words out of his mouth, directed at Callum. "Shaw took it," Callum said. Friedrich stood very still. Then he sat down in the chair beside Rosa without being invited to, placed his hands flat on the desk, and looked at the two of them with the expression of a man who has decided that emotion is currently an unaffordable luxury. "Then tell me what we have," he said. Rosa told him. She presented the 7 discrepancies chronologically clearly, without editorializing. She showed him her translation notes alongside Shaw's English versions. She showed him the timeline she and Callum had constructed. Friedrich listened to all of it without interrupting, which Rosa understood was a form of respect. He was treating her account the way he would treat the account of a professional, which was what she was, and she appreciated the clarity of that treatment more than she would have appreciated any warmer gesture. When she finished, Friedrich turned to his own attorney and spoke in rapid German. Rosa translated quietly for Callum without being asked. Friedrich was saying that he wanted copies made of every document on the desk before anything else happened, that he wanted his Hamburg office contacted by telegraph immediately, and that he wanted to know if there was a way to verify the original contract's contents through the German notary who had sealed it. "There is," Rosa said, still in English. Both men looked at her. "German commercial documents sealed by a registered notary are recorded in the notary's ledger at the time of sealing," she said. "Every page summarized. The ledger is the notary's legal record independent of whatever physical document the parties carry. If Friedrich's Hamburg notary sealed that contract, there is a corresponding ledger entry in Hamburg that describes its contents." She looked at Friedrich. "Is the notary still in business?" Friedrich looked at his attorney. His attorney nodded. "Then the original contract still exists," Rosa said. Shaw took the copy Friedrich brought to Wyoming. The legal record of what that document contains is sitting in a ledger in Hamburg. The air in the room changed. Rosa felt it, a shift from the heavy, contained desperation of men facing a problem they can't solve to something that still carried weight, but had acquired for the first time direction. "How long would it take to get a certified copy from Hamburg?" Callum asked. "Weeks by post," Friedrich said. "But I have a business associate in New York who maintains contacts with German commercial law offices. If I telegraph today—" He looked at his attorney. A rapid exchange in German. Then back to Callum. "10 days, perhaps 12. Shaw will move before that," Callum said. He wasn't looking for an argument. He was stating a fact and thinking past it simultaneously, and Rosa recognized that quality in him, the ability to identify a bad reality clearly and then proceed without drama toward what could be done within it. "Then we need to understand where Shaw is going and what he plans to do when he gets there," Rosa said. "He took the contract because it's the only document that ties the Western Continental Holdings Corporation to this negotiation. Without it, the syndicate's involvement is harder to prove, which means they're going to try to get ahead of this." Callum looked at her. "What does that mean for you?" "What do you mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that yesterday you were a hotel attendant who overheard a business conversation and spoke up. Today, you're the person who documented a fraud. Those are different things to be from the syndicate's perspective." He held her gaze. "I want to know if you understand that." Rosa understood it. She had understood it since she put the coffee pot down. The moment she opened her mouth in that dining room, she had stopped being invisible. And invisible was the only truly safe thing a woman in her position could be. "I understand it," she said. And "And I'm still sitting here," she said. Something moved across his face too quick to fully read, but she caught the shape of it. Not pity. Not admiration exactly. Something quieter and more serious than both. He nodded once, accepting her answer, the way he accepted everything she said completely, without qualification. "Then we work fast," he said. They worked fast. Rosa spent the rest of the morning going through freight records, while Callum and Friedrich's attorney began drafting a formal complaint to the territorial court, documenting the evidence of fraud. Friedrich telegraphed his New York associate. The ranch accountant was brought in and given Rosa's 7-discrepancy timeline to cross-reference against the ranch's own financial records, looking for the moments, the specific dates, when decisions had been made on the basis of what Shaw had told Callum Friedrich wanted and what those decisions had cost. The accountant came back inside 2 hours with a number. He put it on the desk in front of Callum. Callum looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then he said quietly, he redirected every favorable concession Friedrich offered. Every time Friedrich made an adjustment that would have helped the ranch financially, Shaw told me Friedrich was demanding something else instead. "Yes," Rosa said. "So Friedrich thinks I rejected his concessions, and I think Friedrich never offered them." "Which means," Friedrich said from the corner where he had been reviewing his own documents, "that we have spent 4 months being taught to distrust each other." He looked at Callum directly. "Whatever disagreements this negotiation appeared to produce between us, I did not initiate them." "Neither did I," Callum said. The two men looked at each other across the room, across 4 months of manufactured suspicion, across the careful patient work of a man who had been paid to ensure they never actually understood each other. "Then perhaps," Friedrich said, "we should start over." "We should," Callum said, "but not until we've dealt with Shaw." That afternoon a telegram arrived. It came to the ranch office addressed to Callum, but the name at the bottom was not Shaw's. It was from a law firm in Cheyenne that Rosa had never heard of, and it stated in the formal language of legal correspondence that their client, the Western Continental Railroad Syndicate, wished to notify Mr. Rourke that documents had come to light, indicating that Mr. Rourke himself had been the architect of the fraudulent partnership terms, and that unless Mr. Rourke wished to face formal charges of commercial fraud before the territorial court, he would agree within 48 hours to transfer the water rights to Willow Creek to the syndicate in exchange for a release of all claims. Callum read it twice. He handed it to Rosa. She read it once. "They're moving," she said. 48 hours, he said. "They want this resolved before the Hamburg ledger can be retrieved," she said. "Before Friedrich's attorney can file anything. Before anyone can produce independent corroboration." She set the telegram on the desk. "The documents they say have come to light, they're forgeries. They have to be. Shaw left with the contract, not with anything that connects you to the fraud. To implicate you, they'd need documents that don't exist." "They need documents that don't exist yet," Callum said. Rosa understood what he meant. A man like Shaw, working for an organization with sufficient resources and sufficient motive, could produce documents that appeared to predate the events they described. Letters, contracts, correspondence. In a world where every commercial document was handwritten, and the only authentication method was comparison against other handwritten documents. Forgery was not impossible. It was not even particularly difficult if you knew what you were doing and had access to the right materials. "He's going to try to reframe everything that happened in that dining room," Rosa said. "Make it look like you engineered the conflict between yourself and Friedrich. He'll need witnesses who will support that account." She thought for a moment. "The other men in that room yesterday, how well do you know them?" "My foremen are solid," Callum said. "Friedrich's people are Friedrich's people. The lawyers," he paused. "The lawyers were retained by Shaw for the negotiation. He brought them in. I didn't choose them." Rosa looked at him. "You need your own legal representation, independent of anyone Shaw had any contact with, today." "I know a man in Cheyenne," Callum said. "Marcus Webb. He's represented ranchers in water rights cases before. Good man, honest." He was already standing. "I'll go myself." "Take Friedrich," Rosa said. "You need Friedrich in that meeting. Whatever legal strategy you build, it has to account for the German records, and Friedrich is the only one who can speak to those independently of my translation." Callum stopped. looked at her. "You're right," he said in the simple, direct way of a man who acknowledges a correct call without needing to make a production of it. "Can you stay here with the records? I need someone I trust with those documents." The sentence landed quietly, and Rosa let it land, because the word trust in that context from that man was not a small word, and she was not going to pretend it was. "Go," she said. "I'll be here." Hai and Friedrich left together. Rosa remained at the desk with the ranch accountant and a substantial pile of correspondence, and the specific, focused calm she always found in difficult work. The settling of the mind that came from having something precise and necessary to do, and the ability to do it. She spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing freight records against the timeline she and Callum had built that morning, looking for the financial architecture beneath Shaw's linguistic architecture. Where the mistranslations had redirected the negotiation, the freight records should show the corresponding financial effect: money moved at the wrong time. Shipments rerouted, costs attributed to the wrong party. The paper trail of a fraud was always embedded in the financial records if you knew where the pressure points were and what to look for around them. She found the first one inside 20 minutes. A freight invoice from March charged to Red Willow Ranch for a cattle shipment that, according to the German correspondence, Friedrich had agreed to absorb as a good faith gesture early in the partnership discussions. Shaw had told Cam that Friedrich had retracted the offer. Friedrich had never retracted it. The invoice had been charged to the ranch. The money had left the ranch account, and it had been attributed in the books to what Shaw described as German party revision of transport terms. Rosa set that aside and kept looking. She found 3 more in the next hour. 4 instances of costs that Friedrich had agreed to carry being silently transferred to Red Willow Ranch through invoice adjustments that individually were the kind of thing a busy rancher would sign off on without scrutinizing the underlying negotiation records. Individually, they were noise. Together, they were a pattern. Together, they showed a ranch being systematically weakened, not dramatically, not in ways that would trigger alarm, but steadily, incrementally. The way a man who knows what he's doing applies pressure. She was calculating the total when the ranch foreman knocked and opened the door. He said, "Miss Merriweather, there's a man asking for you at the front." Rosa looked up. "Who?" The foreman looked uncomfortable in the specific way of a man who doesn't want to be the one delivering bad news. "He says he's from the Western Continental Railroad Syndicate, ma'am. He says he has a message for you personally." Rosa was quiet for a moment. She looked at the documents spread across the desk. She thought about what Callum had said that morning, that being the person who documented the fraud was different from being the person who overheard a conversation. That those were different things to be. She closed the folder in front of her. "Tell him I'll be out in a moment," she said. She took the time she needed. She organized the documents into a specific order, wrote a clear note on the top page describing what each stack contained and what she had found in it, and placed it where the accountant would see it immediately. Then she straightened her dress, picked up her writing pad, and walked to the front of the office. The man waiting for her was not Shaw. He was younger than Shaw, with the pressed, unremarkable appearance of a professional messenger or a junior legal clerk. Someone whose job was to deliver things and be forgotten. He held an envelope, which he extended toward Rosa when she appeared. "Miss Merriweather," he said, "from the Western Continental Railroad Syndicate." Rosa took the envelope. She did not open it in front of him. "Is there a reply expected?" "No, ma'am." "Then you can go," she said. He went. She stood in the front room of the ranch office and opened the envelope and read what was inside. It was short, 1 paragraph, formally worded in the manner of legal correspondence, but stripped of the courtesies that formal legal correspondence usually included, which told her something about the mindset of whoever had drafted it. It said that the Western Continental Railroad Syndicate was aware that Miss Rosalie Merriweather had been engaged by Mr. Callum Rourke in connection with certain translation work. It said that Miss Merriweather's continued involvement in this matter was not in her best interests. It said that Miss Merriweather, as a private citizen without legal credentials, without official standing, and without the professional protections afforded to licensed practitioners, was exposing herself to significant personal liability if her translation work was found to have materially influenced the outcome of a formal commercial dispute. It said that the syndicate wished to offer Miss Merriweather the opportunity to withdraw from this engagement without consequence. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her writing pad, went back to the desk, sat down, and continued working. Because that letter was not a legal document. It was a threat dressed in legal language, and there was an important difference between those two things. And Rosa Merriweather, who had spent 15 years learning to read the difference between what a document said and what it meant, was not going to confuse them now. By the time Callum and Friedrich returned from Marcus Webb's office at 4 o'clock, she had identified 9 separate financial discrepancies across 18 months of ranch accounts. 9 moments at which money had moved in directions that only made sense if the underlying German correspondence had been systematically mistranslated. She presented her findings to Callum Friedrich and Marcus Webb, who was a compact, quiet man with sharp eyes and the particular patient attention of someone who had spent decades separating relevant facts from irrelevant ones and had become very good at it. Webb listened to everything without interrupting. Then he looked at Rosa's documentation for a long time. "Miss Merriweather," he said, "who taught you to analyze commercial records?" "My father," she said. "He was a commercial translator. I assisted him from childhood." "Are you currently employed?" "I've recently left my previous position," she said, which was the accurate way to describe what had happened with the Frontier House, whose head steward had sent a note to her boarding house that morning. Webb looked at Callum. "You need her in that courtroom," he said. "I know," Callum said. He was looking at Rosa. "If she's willing." Rosa thought about the letter in her writing pad. She thought about the sentence in it, significant personal liability, and the intention behind it, which was to make her feel that her position in this was fragile, and that the right response to fragility was retreat. She thought about the 12-year-old girl at the kitchen table, parsing German livestock invoices by lamplight. Her father's voice in her ear. The first reading is for vocabulary. The second is for structure. The third is for what they're not saying. She knew what the letter was not saying. It was not saying that she had done anything wrong. It was not saying she had any actual liability. It was saying that the syndicate was afraid of her and wanted her gone and was hoping that she didn't know the difference between a genuine legal threat and a letter designed to look like one. She knew the difference. "I'm willing," she said. Webb nodded. He turned to the documents and began laying out the strategy. They had the financial discrepancy records Rosa had built. They had the 7 translation discrepancies from the correspondence archive. They had Friedrich's commitment to obtain the Hamburg notary ledger by telegraph through his New York contact. They had the telegram from the syndicate's law firm, which was itself evidence that the syndicate had been aware of Shaw's activities and had chosen to escalate rather than distance themselves from him. "They're going to hold a hearing in Cheyenne," Webb said. "The syndicate will push for it quickly. They want to establish their narrative before our evidence is complete. We need to be ready to match their pace." He looked at Rosa. "Your presence at that hearing and your testimony about what you heard and translated is going to be the center of this. Without you, we have financial records that suggest fraud, but require expert interpretation to explain. With you, we have a witness who was in the room, who has documented expertise in commercial German translation, and who can walk a judge through exactly what was said and what was hidden." "Shaw will attack her credibility," Callum said. "Shaw will try," Webb said. "He'll argue she's not credentialed, that she misunderstood the language, that she has a financial interest in the outcome because she's now employed by one of the parties." He looked at Rosa directly. "He's going to make it about who you are rather than what you know. Are you prepared for that?" Rosa had been prepared for that since she was old enough to understand that certain rooms would always try to make her fight for the right to speak before they would listen to what she said. "Yes," she said. "Good," Webb said. He began making notes. "Then we have work to do." Outside the office, the Wyoming afternoon moved through its hours the way Wyoming afternoons did, wide and hot and indifferent to the human urgencies unfolding beneath the sky. Somewhere in Cheyenne, Percival Shaw was in a room with the syndicate's lawyers, constructing the version of events that would be presented at a hearing designed to take everything Callum Rourke had built and transfer it to men who had decided they wanted it. Inside the office, Rosa Merriweather was building something they hadn't counted on. They had assumed she would read the letter and disappear. They had assumed that a woman in her position, unaccredited, unsupported, with no professional standing, and no institutional backing, would understand her own vulnerability clearly enough to make the rational choice. They had made the same mistake Shaw had made. They had looked at her and seen only what she appeared to be. They had not looked at what she was carrying. The hearing was set for 10 days out. Webb got this notification the morning after their first strategy meeting, a formal summons from the territorial court requested by the Western Continental Railroad Syndicate's legal representatives, scheduling a commercial fraud hearing that listed Callum Rourke as the primary subject of investigation. Not Shaw. Not the syndicate. Callum. Rosa read the summons twice when Webb passed it across the desk. The language was precise and deliberate in the way of documents written by men who understood exactly what they were doing. The syndicate had moved faster than any of them had anticipated, which told her something important: they were not confident. Confident men didn't rush. Men who knew their position was solid waited for the other side to exhaust themselves. Men who rushed did it because they understood that time was working against them and they needed the verdict before the evidence arrived. "They know about the Hamburg ledger," Rosa said. Webb looked at her. "What makes you say that?" 10 days, she said. Friedrich's contact said 10 to 12 days for a certified copy from Hamburg. This hearing is scheduled for exactly 10 days from today. They want a verdict before that document can be entered into evidence. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Friedrich. "Who did you telegraph in New York?" "A business associate," Friedrich said. "A man I have worked with for 15 years. I trust him completely." "His telegraph office," Webb said. "Who else has access to messages sent and received through his office?" Friedrich's expression shifted. Not dramatically. But Rosa caught it, the particular stillness of a man who has just understood that a channel he considered private may not have been. "We need to move the Hamburg request through a different contact," Rosa said. "Someone the syndicate doesn't know to watch." "I have a second associate," Friedrich said. "In Baltimore. No connection to New York. No connection to Wyoming." He was already standing. "I'll go to the telegraph office myself. Today." "Don't use your own name on the message," Webb said. Friedrich looked at him. A flash of pride quickly managed. "I am not unacquainted with caution, Mr. Webb." He left within the hour. That left 9 days. 9 days to build a case strong enough to withstand whatever Shaw and the syndicate's lawyers had been constructing since the afternoon. He walked out of that private dining room with the original contract under his arm. Rosa worked. She worked the way she had always worked when the stakes were real, methodically, without wasted motion, keeping the larger structure of what she was building clearly in front of her, so that each individual task connected to it. She went back through the freight records and the correspondence archive, and built a master timeline covering 18 months, every document cross-referenced and annotated in her 3-column format. Every discrepancy dated and described and linked to its financial consequence. Callum worked beside her, not over her shoulder, not supervising. He worked at the other end of the same desk, managing the ranch business that couldn't stop simply because his future was under legal threat. And when Rosa needed to ask him something about a specific decision or a specific date, she asked, and he answered directly and completely, and without making her feel that the question was inconvenient. On the 3rd day, Webb came in with news that altered everything. He sat down across from both of them, placed a single sheet of paper on the desk, and said, "Shaw has a witness." Rosa and Callum both looked at the paper. "A man named Gerald Purcell," Webb said. "He's listed as a commercial attorney formerly employed by a Denver trading company. He's prepared to testify that he was present at a private meeting between Callum Rourke and a representative of the Western Continental Holdings Corporation 3 months ago, at which Callum agreed to the water rights transfer in exchange for the corporation absorbing Red Willow Ranch's existing debt." Callum's expression went very still. "I have never met anyone from that corporation. I didn't know that corporation existed until Rosa found it on page 24. "I know," Webb said. "Then Purcell is lying," Callum said. "Yes," Webb said. "The question is whether we can prove it." He looked at his notes. Purcell is credentialed. He has a history with the Denver Trading Company that will check out on the surface. He'll present well. And the syndicate's lawyers are going to put him on the stand before they put Shaw on, which means by the time anyone questions Shaw's credibility, Purcell will have already established a framework that makes Callum look like the architect of the whole scheme. Rosa had been listening to all of this with the specific focused attention she gave to documents that required her to understand not just what they said, but what they were designed to make someone believe. "What does Purcell gain from this?" she said. Webb looked at her. "What do you mean? A professional man, a credentialed attorney, agrees to commit perjury in a territorial court proceeding. That's not a small thing. Whatever the syndicate is paying him, it has to be worth the risk of being caught." She thought for a moment. "Which means Purcell believes the risk of being caught is low. He believes the case against Callum is going to hold, which means he believes the syndicate's evidence is strong enough to make his testimony look credible rather than contested. Or," Callum said quietly, "he believes that whatever evidence contradicts him is going to be discredited before it matters." The room went very still. Rosa understood what he meant 1 second before he said it. "They're going to go after you," Callum said. He was looking at her directly. "Not just your testimony, you personally. They're going to try to destroy your credibility before the hearing so completely that anything you say in that room lands as the word of a woman who has already been publicly discredited." Rosa, hearing it stated plainly in a room with two men looking at her, were different experiences, and she allowed herself 1 moment to feel the full weight of it. The specific exhaustion of a woman who has spent her life fighting to be heard, and finds herself once again in a situation where the primary strategy of her opponents is to ensure she isn't. 1 moment. Then she set it aside. "How?" she said. "How would they do it?" "Public reputation," Webb said. "Cheyenne is not a large city. If the right stories start circulating before the hearing that your translation was motivated by a personal interest in Rourke, that you fabricated or exaggerated what you heard, that your background doesn't qualify you to interpret commercial German, it poisons the well before you ever take the stand." He paused. "I need to know if there's anything in your history they can use. Anything that taken out of context could be made to look—" "She doesn't need to answer that," Callum said. Webb looked at him. "Callum, I need to prepare." "She doesn't need to answer it in that framing," Callum said. He was still looking at Rosa, but his voice had the quality it took on when a decision had been made, and the making of it was not up for discussion. "Ask her what her qualifications are. Ask her what her history is. Don't ask her to defend herself against accusations that haven't been made yet." Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Merriweather, can you document your translation experience?" "Yes," Rosa said. "I have correspondence from 12 of my father's clients written to him over 15 years that references my contribution to the translation work. I have 3 merchants currently operating in Cheyenne who employed my father's services and can speak to my work directly. And I have—" She paused, because what she was about to say was true and relevant, and she had not mentioned it to anyone in this room before now. "I have a published translation. A German commercial law handbook translated into English in 1881 for a publishing house in St. Louis. My name is on the title page." Both men looked at her. "You're published," Webb said. "The publishing house was small," Rosa said. "The handbook was not widely distributed. But the publication exists with my name attached, and the work is accurate, and anyone who examines it against the original German can verify that accuracy independently." Webb picked up his pen. "What's the title?" she told him. He wrote it down. He underlined it twice. "That changes the credibility calculation significantly," he said. "A published translator is harder to dismiss as someone who picked up a few phrases helping immigrants at a hotel. It also means the syndicate's lawyers will try to find something wrong with the translation itself," Callum said. "They'll hire their own expert to challenge it." "Let them," Rosa said. "The translation is correct." She said it without heat and without uncertainty, because it was simply true, and she had learned from her father that the most powerful thing about the truth was that it didn't require defense. It required only accurate presentation. Defense was what you needed when you weren't sure. Rosa was sure. On the 5th day, the story started. It was small. At first, the kind of thing that travels through a city and whispers, that you heard secondhand from people who heard it from someone else, that had no clear source, because its source had taken careful precautions to remain invisible. Rosa heard about it from her landlady, who had heard it from the woman who ran the dry goods counter 2 streets over, who had heard it from a customer whose husband worked at the bank. The story being circulated was that Rosa Merriweather had fabricated her translation of Friedrich Adler's statement in the hotel dining room. That she had misunderstood the German, understandably given that she had no formal credentials, and had then, rather than admit her error, constructed an elaborate alternative account to protect herself from professional embarrassment. That her subsequent involvement with Callum Rourke's legal defense was motivated not by honest testimony, but by the financial arrangement she had entered into with him. Rosa went to Webb's office the morning she heard it and told him what was being said. I was not surprised. "It started 2 days ago," he said. "I've been tracking it." "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't want to pull your attention from the document work," he said. "And I didn't want to tell you until I had a response ready." He looked at her steadily. "I have a response ready. The St. Louis publishing house confirmed the translation by telegraph yesterday. I'm having a certified copy of the title page and publication record sent by express mail. It'll arrive before the hearing. And one of Friedrich's representatives found something yesterday evening that I need you to look at." He placed a document on the desk. Rosa picked it up. It was a letter written in German dated 8 months prior to the hotel negotiation. She read the first paragraph and went very still. It was a letter from Friedrich Adler to a business associate in Chicago. In it, Friedrich described his concerns about the Wyoming cattle investment and mentioned specifically that he had been advised by his interpreter Percival Shaw that Callum Rourke had verbally agreed to a water rights provision that Friedrich had never requested and would not have requested because it was commercially unreasonable. Friedrich had documented his own confusion 8 months ago. He had written it down in German in a private letter to a trusted colleague, and he had kept that letter, and it was now sitting on Webb's desk in Rosa's hands, and it was dated 8 months before anyone could accuse Rosa of having any involvement in the situation whatsoever. "This predates everything," Rosa said. "Yes," Webb said. "Friedrich's confusion about the water rights isn't something Shaw created in the final negotiation. He built it in from the beginning. 8 months ago, Friedrich was already being told Callum had agreed to things Callum hadn't agreed to. Friedrich found 2 more letters," Webb said. "Similar content, different dates. He's been keeping his own record of the inconsistencies the way a cautious businessman keeps records, not because he suspected fraud specifically, but because the negotiation felt wrong, and he trusted that instinct enough to document it." Rosa set the letter down carefully. She looked at Webb. Friedrich never trusted Shaw. He trusted him enough to keep using him, Webb said. But he was careful enough to write things down. He almost smiled. Fortunately for us. On the 7th day, something happened that none of them had planned for. A woman came to Webb's office. She arrived in the late afternoon unannounced and asked for Miss Merriweather by name. The clerk at the front showed her in, and Rosa looked up from the correspondence she was cross-referencing and saw a woman in her mid-40s well-dressed, composed with the specific bearing of someone who had made a difficult decision and had arrived at the point of acting on it before she could change her mind. "Miss Merriweather," the woman said. "My name is Catherine Voss. My husband manages the telegraph office on 2nd Street. She stopped. She looked at Rosa with an expression that mixed resolution and discomfort in the proportions of a woman who is about to say something she knows will cost her. "He received a message 3 weeks ago, before any of this became public. A message that came through on the Western Continental Railroad Syndicate's account directed to Percival Shaw." Rosa set down her pen. "Mrs. Voss," she said carefully, "please sit down." Catherine Voss sat. She folded her hands in her lap with the neatness of someone who has organized themselves against nervousness. The message instructed Shaw to ensure that the German documents contained specific provisions regarding Willow Creek. It specified the clause, the one giving the holding corporation control of the water access. She looked at Rosa directly. "My husband wrote it out by hand the way he does with all the messages that come through. He keeps a record. He always has. He says a man in his position can't be too careful about what passes through his office." Rosa's heart was beating hard and steady, the way it had beaten when she stood in that dining room with the coffee pot in her hand. "Does your husband know you're here?" "He sent me," Catherine Voss said. "He would have come himself, but he was concerned the syndicate is a significant customer of the telegraph office, and he didn't know." She paused. "He didn't know who to trust. But he knew your name from the papers, and he said if anyone in this business was going to use that record honestly, it was the woman who put the coffee pot down." Rosa looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood and went to the door and called for Webb. Webb came and heard Catherine Voss repeat what she had told Rosa and sat down very slowly in the chair nearest the window. He was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, "Mrs. Voss, I need your husband in my office tomorrow morning with that record. Early, before 8 o'clock. "He'll be here," Catherine Voss said. She left. Webb closed the door behind her and turned to Rosa. "That telegraph record is direct evidence," he said. "Not circumstantial, not inferential. The syndicate instructed Shaw in writing through a documented channel to embed specific fraudulent provisions in the German contract. Before the negotiation happened, before Callum signed anything, before any of this." He put his hand flat on the desk. "Rosa, that changes everything." "It changes the hearing," she said. "It doesn't change what they're going to do to me on that stand." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." He looked at her steadily. "Are you ready for that?" She thought about the letter the syndicate had sent her. She thought about the stories circulating through Cheyenne about her motives and her qualifications and her character. She thought about every room she had ever walked into, where the first thing that happened was that someone looked at her body and made a decision. She thought about her father's voice. The third reading is for what they're not saying. What the syndicate was not saying, in everything they had done. The letter, the whisper campaign, the rushed hearing, was that they were afraid the truth would come out. Everything they had done was designed to prevent that, which meant the truth properly presented was exactly as powerful as Rosa had believed it was when she put that coffee pot down. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cool, which was unusual for August in Wyoming, as though the weather had decided to take the proceedings seriously. Rosa dressed carefully, her best dress pressed the night before, and the small brooch that had been her mother's, which she did not wear often, but wore today, because her mother had been a woman who understood what it meant to walk into a room that didn't want you there, and conduct yourself with dignity regardless. Webb met her and Callum outside the courthouse. Friedrich was already inside with his attorney. The ranch foremen were there. Marcus Webb's junior clerk was there with 2 copies of every document they intended to present, organized in the precise order Webb had specified. The telegraph office record had arrived the previous morning with Mr. Voss himself, a quiet man with careful hands, who had brought his original ledger, not a copy the original, and placed it in Webb's hands with the expression of a man setting down something heavy that he had been carrying for weeks. The courtroom was full. Rosa had expected that, but the reality of it was different from the anticipation. Every bench was occupied. She recognized ranchers from across Cheyenne County, men who had dealings with Red Willow Ranch, men who had dealings with the railroad syndicate, men who understood that what was decided in this room would affect water rights and cattle corridors and the basic commercial geography of the territory for years. She recognized the hotel's head steward sitting near the back, which told her the Frontier House had an interest in the outcome. She recognized 2 men she did not know by name, but who had the specific polished look of the syndicate's people men who had been sent to observe. She recognized Percival Shaw. He was seated at the far end of the room with the syndicate's legal team. He was dressed impeccably. He looked entirely composed. He looked like a man who had done nothing wrong and was attending this proceeding as a professional formality. He looked, Rosa thought, exactly the way a man looked when he had prepared carefully and believed his preparation was sufficient. He saw her when she came in. Their eyes met across the crowded room. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away, not in discomfort, but in the deliberate dismissal of a man communicating that she was not a significant concern. Rosa sat down beside Webb and placed her writing pad on the table and looked forward. The syndicate's attorney opened the proceedings with the confident precision of a man who had presented this kind of material many times. He laid out a narrative that was clean and logical and entirely false, constructed from Shaw's account of events, Purcell's fabricated testimony, and a collection of documents that Rosa could see from across the room had been produced on paper that was slightly too white and slightly too uniform for materials that were supposed to span 18 months of active commercial correspondence. Purcell took the stand first. He was a composed man, practiced, credentialed, plausible. He described a meeting that had never taken place in language that was specific enough to sound like memory. He described Callum Rourke agreeing to the water rights transfer in exchange for debt relief. He described signing a document to that effect. He produced a copy of that document. Rosa looked at the document when it was passed to Webb. She read it carefully. Then she wrote 2 words on her writing pad and slid it toward Webb. Webb read the 2 words. He looked at her. She nodded. The 2 words were wrong date. The document Purcell had produced was dated to a Wednesday in May. Rosa had been cross-referencing the ranch's records for a week. She knew with the precision of someone who had indexed every document in those files by date that Callum had been in the northern grazing territory on that Wednesday, a 4-day ride from Cheyenne, with 4 of his hands managing a fence dispute that was documented in letters in the ranch account books and in a note written to Friedrich's representative on that same date from that same location. Callum Rourke could not have been in a private meeting in Cheyenne on a Wednesday in May, because Callum Rourke had been 50 miles north of Cheyenne on that Wednesday, and the evidence of that fact was sitting in Webb's case file. Webb stood when Purcell finished. He was very calm the way effective lawyers were calm, not because the situation didn't warrant urgency, but because composure was more persuasive than agitation, and he knew it. He established Callum's location on the date in question in 4 questions. Then he produced the documentation, the ranch account entry, the fence dispute correspondence, the letter to Friedrich's representative, each one dated and signed and cross-referenced against each other. Purcell's testimony collapsed in the span of 11 minutes. Not dramatically. The collapse was quiet and thorough, like a wall that looks solid until the precise point at which it doesn't, and then there is nothing left. The syndicate's attorney tried to redirect. Webb let him. The documentation held. Then Webb called Rosa. She walked to the stand, aware of every eye in the room, and aware more specifically of the quality of attention coming from the syndicate's section of the gallery, the particular focused attention of men recalculating their position. She sat down. She put her hands in her lap. She looked at Webb. He walked her through her qualifications first. Her father's practice. The 15 years of commercial translation work. The published handbook, and here Webb produced the certified copy from St. Louis, which he entered into evidence with the precision of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The translation was examined by the judge. It was passed to the syndicate's attorney, who looked at it with an expression that told Rosa his team had not located this particular document in their preparation. Then Webb walked her through what she had heard in the dining room. She reproduced Friedrich's German statement with exact fidelity. She provided the accurate English translation. She explained in plain language what the commercial implication of that statement was, and why Shaw's translation, "The water provisions are completely satisfactory," was not a mistranslation, but a deliberate substitution. The syndicate's attorney cross-examined her for 40 minutes. He challenged her credentials. He challenged her interpretation of specific German commercial terms. He challenged her memory of events. He suggested that her financial arrangement with Callum Rourke compromised her objectivity. Rosa answered every question with the same steady, precise calm she brought to every document she had ever translated. She did not become flustered. She did not become defensive. She did not allow him to reframe her answers by accepting his framing. She corrected it every time, simply and directly, using the exact language of the documents and the exact content of her expertise. When he suggested that her translation of a specific German phrase could reasonably be interpreted differently, she explained with the patience of someone who genuinely knew what she was talking about, exactly why it could not, and what grammatical structure made her interpretation the only accurate one. When he suggested her involvement with Callum Rourke was personally motivated, she said, "My involvement began when I heard a lie spoken in a language the other parties in the room didn't understand. I spoke because it was true. I continued because the evidence warranted it. You can review my documentation and find a single inaccuracy if one exists. I believe you will not find one. He did not find one. Then Webb entered the telegraph record. Mr. Voss was called to authenticate it. He was a meticulous man, and his ledger was a meticulous document, and the entry in question, the syndicate's instruction to Shaw, dated 3 weeks before the hotel negotiation, specifying the fraudulent provisions to be embedded in the German contract, was read aloud into the record of the proceeding in plain, unambiguous English. The syndicate's attorney objected. Webb had anticipated every possible objection and had the corresponding legal response prepared for each one. The judge sustained none of the objections. Then Friedrich took the stand. He produced his 8-month-old letter to his Chicago associate, his own documentation of his confusion predating Rosa's involvement by 8 months, written in his own hand in German, translated for the court by Rosa, and cross-checked by Friedrich's own attorney. And then Webb called Shaw. Shaw had maintained his composure through everything. Rosa had been watching him from the stand and from the table, and his composure had held even through the telegraph record, even through Friedrich's letter, even through the collapse of Purcell's testimony. Here was a man who had prepared for multiple contingencies and who had enough professional experience with difficult situations to understand that composure was itself a kind of argument. I took the stand with the ease of a man who believed he still had a viable position. Webb let him sit with that belief for exactly 4 questions. Then he placed the telegraph record in front of Shaw and asked him to read aloud the instruction the syndicate had sent him 3 weeks before the hotel negotiation. Shaw read it. His voice didn't waver. Rosa had to concede him that. His voice was steady all the way through. "Mr. Shaw," Webb said, "the provisions described in that instruction, are they identical to the provisions Miss Merriweather identified on page 24 of the German contract?" A pause, not long, but long enough. "They are similar," Shaw said. "Are they identical?" Another pause. "In substance," Shaw said. "Yes or no, Mr. Shaw," the judge said. Shaw looked at the telegraph record. He looked at the gallery. He looked for one moment at Rosa, and in that moment, his composure finally showed its first real crack, not in his face, but in his eyes, in the particular stillness of a man who has just understood that the ground he was standing on is no longer there. "Yes," Shaw said. The room erupted. The judge called for order. It took a full minute. Rosa sat at the table with her hands folded in front of her and waited for the noise to settle, and in the waiting she thought about the 12-year-old girl at the kitchen table by lamplight and her father's voice, and the rule she had carried every day since the 3rd reading is for what they're not saying. What Shaw had not been saying across the entire hearing, what the syndicate had not been saying in every move they had made, was that they knew their position was built on fraud. They had known it from the beginning. Every strategy they had employed, from the rushed hearing to the whisper campaign to the letter to Rosa's boarding house, was the strategy of men who understood that if the truth was presented accurately, they would lose. The truth had been presented accurately. Shaw broke within the hour. Not dramatically. He asked to speak with the syndicate's attorney privately. The private conversation lasted 12 minutes. When Shaw returned to the stand, his attorney was no longer sitting with the syndicate's legal team. He admitted everything: the instruction, the 2 sets of documents, the phantom company, the manufactured conflict between Callum and Friedrich, the financial diversions Rosa had identified in the freight records, the full 18-month architecture of a scheme designed to weaken Red Willow Ranch to the point of vulnerability, and then acquire its water rights through a legal mechanism that looked like legitimate commercial consequence. The syndicate attorney tried to distance his clients from Shaw's testimony. Webb had anticipated that too. The telegraph record made it impossible. The judge did not render a final verdict that afternoon. Formal proceedings required more time, more documentation, more process. But the direction of the proceeding was no longer in question, and every person in that room understood it. As people began to file out, the syndicate attorney approached Rosa's table. He was a composed man professionally. He looked at her and said in the tone of a man who has lost and is choosing how to lose, "You're a formidable witness, Miss Merriweather." Rosa looked at him. "I'm an accurate translator," she said. "That's all I've ever been." He walked away. Callum was beside her before she had fully turned around. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at her for a moment, the way he had looked at her across that table in the hotel dining room, directly without the social machinery that most men inserted between themselves and the women they were looking at. "You all right?" he said. Rosa considered the question honestly. Her hands had been steady all day. Her voice had been steady all day. Something underneath both of those things had been shaking since she walked into this room and saw the full gallery, and understood completely what the next several hours were going to require of her. "I will be," she said. He nodded. He accepted that the way he accepted everything she said completely, without trying to modify it into something easier. Friedrich appeared at her other side. He looked at her with the direct, unperformative regard she had come to recognize as his highest form of respect. "Miss Merriweather," he said, "when this is concluded, I would like to discuss something with you. A professional matter." He paused. "Not today. When you are ready." "All right," Rosa said. Around them, the courtroom continued to empty. Ranchers who had been watching from the gallery stopped at the table, not with the effusive praise of men who had been converted, but with the quiet, solid acknowledgement of people who recognized competence and wished to indicate they had seen it. A nod, a brief word, a handshake offered to Callum, and in 2 cases to Rosa directly, which was not a small thing in 1887, and which Rosa received with the simple dignity of someone who had earned it. Shaw was escorted out by 2 men who had the look of territorial law officers. He did not look at Rosa as he passed. She did not need him to. The last thing she did before leaving the courthouse was pick up her writing pad from the table and check one final time that every document she had brought was accounted for and intact. Every page was there, every word accurate, every truth exactly where she had placed it. The formal verdict came 6 days later. Webb brought it to the ranch office himself, arriving before 8 in the morning with the document under his arm and an expression that told Rosa everything before he opened his mouth. He set the verdict on the desk in front of Callum and stepped back, and Callum read it, and when he looked up, his face had the particular quality of a man who has been braced for impact for so long that the absence of it takes a moment to process. The territorial court invalidated every fraudulent document. The Western Continental Holdings Corporation was formally identified as a shell entity created by the Railroad Syndicate for the sole purpose of acquiring Willow Creek water rights through manufactured commercial default. Shaw's confession, the telegraph record, Friedrich's correspondence, Rosa's documented translation, discrepancies, and the financial timeline she had built across 9 days of records work combined into an evidentiary record that the syndicate's attorneys had been unable to challenge successfully on any material point. Shaw faced fraud charges. 3 syndicate officials faced fraud charges. Gerald Purcell faced perjury charges, which Webb had pushed for specifically and obtained because Webb was the kind of lawyer who understood that a man willing to commit perjury once would do it again if the consequence was merely inconvenience. Red Willow Ranch retained full uncontested ownership of Willow Creek. Callum read the verdict twice. Then he set it on the desk and looked at Rosa. "We need to talk about what comes next," he said. "Yes," she said. "We do." What came next that same afternoon was Friedrich Adler's professional proposal. He arrived at the ranch office at 2 o'clock with his attorney and a single sheet of paper that he placed in front of Rosa without preamble in the direct manner she had come to expect from him and genuinely appreciate. The paper outlined a retainer arrangement. Friedrich's investment operations in Wyoming and the surrounding territories required ongoing translation and contract review services. German, French, and English commercial correspondence partnership agreements, freight contracts, and financial documentation. The retainer was quarterly. The rate he had written at the bottom of the page was more than Rosa had earned in any full year of her life. She read it carefully. She read it a second time. Then she looked at Friedrich. "This is generous," she said. "It is accurate," Friedrich said. "What you did at the hearing was not incidental to the outcome. It was the outcome. I do not pay for sentiment. I pay for results." He looked at her steadily. "I have a proposition beyond the retainer. I am expanding my investment activity in the American West. I need a permanent commercial interpreter and contract consultant based in Wyoming who understands both the German investment perspective and the American ranching context." He paused. "I believe you understand both better than anyone I have encountered in 4 weeks in this territory." Rosa was quiet for a moment. She thought about the Frontier House Hotel. She thought about the payslip and the head steward's note and the 7 years of carrying coffee in rooms where she was not supposed to matter. "I'm not looking for employment," she said. Friedrich tilted his head slightly. "What are you looking for?" "I want to establish an independent office," Rosa said. "Commercial translation and contract consultation. I work for clients, not for employers. I set my own rates. I choose my own cases." She looked at him. "If you want to be my client, Mr. Adler, I welcome that, on those terms." Friedrich looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at Friedrich. Something passed between them that Rosa recognized as the silent confirmation between two men who have just encountered something they hadn't fully anticipated and have found it satisfactory. "Those terms are acceptable," Friedrich said. He extended his hand across the desk. Rosa shook it. Callum had been listening from the chair near the window, close enough to hear far enough to make it clear he was not inserting himself into the negotiation. When Friedrich and his attorney left, he stood and came to the desk and looked at Rosa with an expression she was still learning to read, layered in the way of a man who felt things precisely but did not display them carelessly. "You're really going to turn down the retainer," he said. "I didn't turn it down," she said. "I restructured it. He's my client, not my employer." "There's a difference to you." "There's a considerable difference," she said. "One means I work for him. The other means I work." Callum was quiet for a moment. "I had a conversation with Webb this morning, before he brought the verdict." Rosa waited. "I want to offer you something," Callum said. "And I want to be careful about how I offer it because I've watched you correct me for the better part of 2 weeks, every time I've framed something wrong, and I'd prefer not to require correcting on this one." Despite everything, Rosa almost smiled. "Go ahead." "The ranch has a small building on the eastern edge of the property. It was used as an assay office when we were running mineral surveys 3 years ago. Good structure, 2 rooms. It's been empty since." He looked at her. "I'd like to offer it to you at a fair lease rate for your office. Not as a gift, not as gratitude. A business arrangement. You pay rent. I have a reliable tenant, and you have a professional address that isn't your boarding house." Rosa looked at him for a moment. She thought about what it would mean, a real office with a door that had her name on it, in a location that communicated permanence and professional standing rather than improvisation. She thought about what it would cost her, which was a monthly rent she could afford if Friedrich's retainer held, and 2 or 3 additional clients developed in the first quarter, which she believed they would. She thought about whether accepting a lease from Callum Rourke meant something she wasn't ready for it to mean. "What's fair?" she said. He named a number. It was genuinely fair below market for commercial space in Cheyenne, above the level that would constitute charity. The number of a man who had calculated carefully and understood that she would see through anything that wasn't honest. "I'll take it," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. "Good," he said. They did not shake hands on it. She wasn't sure why not. But the agreement settled between them in the room, the way agreements do, when both parties intend to keep them, and the absence of ceremony felt like its own kind of solidity. The following week was the week Cheyenne caught up with what had happened. It moved through the city, the way real news moved, not in whispers, but in full voice in conversation between ranchers at the supply depot, and merchants at the bank, and women at the dry goods counter, and men at the attorney's offices on the main street. The story of what Rosa Merriweather had done in that dining room, and then in that courthouse, moved through Cheyenne County with the unstoppable momentum of a true thing that has finally been given room to travel. The reactions were not uniform. Some people were straightforwardly impressed. 3 ranchers sent notes to Webb's office asking for Rosa's contact information because they had German investors or German freight partners and had been managing the correspondence badly for years. A merchant on the main street, who had been conducting business through a nephew who spoke approximate German, sent a message to Rosa's boarding house, directly apologetically explaining that he had heard about her work and wondered if she might be interested in reviewing some contracts he'd been unsure about for 2 seasons. Some people were uncomfortable in the specific way that people become uncomfortable when someone they had categorized incorrectly turns out to be something their categories hadn't accounted for. Rosa recognized this reaction and was neither surprised by it nor particularly interested in managing it. Those people would either adjust or they wouldn't, and either outcome was their own business. And some people more than she had expected came to her directly. The woman who ran the laundry, 2 streets from Rosa's boarding house, stopped her on the sidewalk on a Tuesday morning and told her in the practical, unsentimental manner of a woman who spent her days doing hard physical work and had little patience for anything else that she had watched Rosa walk into that courthouse and she had been proud of her and that she wanted Rosa to know it. Rosa thanked her. She meant it completely. On the Thursday of that week, she went to the assay office building on the eastern edge of Red Willow Ranch with a cleaning cloth and a writing pad and the specific purposeful energy of someone beginning something real. The building was exactly what Callum had described. 2 rooms, good structure, empty. She cleaned it herself, which she had expected to do, and which she did not mind. Physical work had never frightened her. She made a list of what she needed: a proper desk, a second chair for clients, a filing cabinet for documents, a lamp for evening work, a sign for the door. She was calculating the cost of those items against her first month's expected income when Callum appeared in the doorway. He was holding a desk. Not alone, one of his foremen had the other end. But Callum was holding one side of a solid oak desk, slightly battered on one corner, exactly the right size for the main room, and he brought it through the door and positioned it where Rosa's writing pad indicated the desk should go, with the straightforward efficiency of a man doing a practical task. "Where did this come from?" Rosa said. "Storage," Callum said. "We had it in the barn. Used to be in the ranch office before I replaced it." He looked at it. "It's solid. Better than anything you'd get from the general store at short notice." "What are you charging me for it?" He looked at her. "Nothing. It was going to rot in the barn." Rosa looked at the desk. She looked at Callum. "If you give me things, the arrangement stops being a business arrangement." "It's salvage," he said. "I'm clearing barn space." Callum. He held up one hand. "All right, $1, final offer." She looked at him for a long moment. The corner of his mouth was doing the thing it did when he was managing the expression he actually had in favor of something more neutral. She had been noticing that for 2 weeks, and had reached the point where she noticed it and recognized it and chose not to comment on it and was aware of making that choice. $1, she said. "Fair." He nodded. The foreman set down his end and left without being asked, with the tact of a man who understood when his presence was no longer required. Callum looked around the room. "What else do you need?" "A filing cabinet," she said. 2 chairs, a sign for the door. "I know a man who does signs," Callum said. "Good work, reasonable price." "Then give me his name," Rosa said. "I'll contact him." "I could—" "His name Callum." He gave her the name. He also gave her the name of the man who had done the ranch office furniture, which he offered with the specific, deliberate casualness of a man who was offering information rather than assistance, and believed she might appreciate the distinction. She did appreciate it. She wrote both names down. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" She looked up from her writing pad. "The first day," he said. "In the hotel. When you put the coffee pot down." He looked at her steadily. "You had 40 more seconds, and then you were done. You could have walked out of that room and never said a word. Nobody would have known you understood what Friedrich said. Nobody would have known what Shaw did." "I would have known," Rosa said. That was enough. She thought about it honestly, because he was asking honestly, and he deserved an honest answer. "I'd spent a long time making myself small enough to fit into rooms that didn't want me," she said. "Not because I was small, because it felt safer." She looked at him. "But safe and invisible are not the same thing. I'd been confusing them for years. And when I watched you reach for that pen, I understood very clearly in that specific moment that there are things that cost more to stay quiet about than to speak." Callum was quiet for a moment. Do you know what I thought when you said it? Don't sign. What? I thought whoever this woman is, she's not afraid of me. He looked at her with the directness that she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things that mattered to him. Every person in that room was being careful around me, watching what they said. Shaw the lawyers, even Friedrich's people. And you put that coffee pot down, and you looked at me like I was just a man who was about to make a mistake, and you told me. You were, Rosa said, a man about to make a mistake. I know, he said. That's what I mean. She understood what he meant. She also understood that this was the edge of a conversation that had been building for 2 weeks, and which she was not certain she was ready to have. Not because she didn't know her own mind, but because her mind contained several things simultaneously, the office and the work, and the future she was building. And this man who kept appearing in the middle of it, not to rescue her, but simply to be there. And she needed to be sure she understood the geography of all of it before she moved. I have a filing cabinet to acquire, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Right, he said. I'll leave you to it. He left. She stood in the empty room with the oak desk and her writing pad and the list of what she needed, and she thought for a moment. Not long. 1 breath, maybe 2. About the specific feeling of being in a room and having someone who could see you clearly choose to look. Then she picked up her writing pad and went back to work. The office opened 3 weeks after the hearing. She had a sign on the door, clean professional black lettering on white, that read, Rosalie Merriweather Commercial Translation and Contract Consultation. Beneath it in smaller letters, English, German, French. She had a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a lamp. She had Friedrich's retainer confirmed in writing. She had 3 additional clients, the rancher with the German freight partner, the merchant with the uncertain contracts, and a third man who had heard about her work from Webb, and who had been conducting a timber partnership with a German-American lumber company for 2 years, without ever being fully confident he understood the terms. She had in the filing cabinet a certified copy of her published translation and a letter from Webb formally documenting her role in the fraud case, which she had not asked for, and which he had produced and sent to her office with a note saying that documentation of professional achievement was a resource, not a vanity, and she should treat it accordingly. She had a small framed photograph of her father on the desk, which she had brought from the boarding house on the day she moved in. It was the only personal item in the office. She had put it in the corner where she would see it when she was working. The first morning she sat at that desk with a client across from her, the timber merchant, a nervous man who had been signing things he didn't fully understand for 2 years, and was experiencing the particular relief of someone who has decided to stop doing that. Rosa felt something settle in her chest that she did not immediately have a word for. It was not triumph. Triumph was too loud for what it was. It was something quieter. The feeling of a thing being exactly what it was supposed to be. She translated the timber contract. She identified 2 clauses that required clarification and 1 clause that required renegotiation. She explained all 3 to the merchant in plain language without condescension and without simplification. And she watched him understand, and the understanding changed his posture, straightened something in him, gave him back a confidence that 2 years of confusion had been quietly eroding. He left with clear terms and an accurate picture of his own business situation. Rosa filed her notes and moved to the next correspondence on her desk. 2 weeks into the office's operation, Callum appeared with what he described as a confusing German invoice from a Hamburg cattle equipment supplier. Rosa looked at the invoice for 45 seconds. This isn't confusing, she said. It seemed confusing to me, he said. The supplier has charged you the correct amount in Deutsche Marks and provided the exchange rate conversion in the invoice footer. This is entirely standard. She looked at him. You could have handled this by mail. The mail is slow, he said. Rosa looked at him. He looked back at her with an expression of entirely unconvincing innocence. Do you have anything that actually requires translation? She said. I have a French telegram from a Lyon silk trader that came in last week, he said. Though I'm not sure why a Lyon silk trader is telegramming a Wyoming cattle rancher. Give it to me, Rosa said. He produced it from his jacket pocket. She read it. She looked at him with the expression she had been developing over the past several weeks for moments that required it. "This is from Friedrich," she said. "He's telling you that a business associate of his in Lyon is interested in investing in American cattle operations and would like an introduction." "Huh," Callum said. "Friedrich sent this 2 weeks ago. I've been meaning to bring it in." "Callum." He sat down in the client chair across from her desk. "All right," he said. "I don't have a French telegram. I wanted to see the office." Rosa set the telegram down. She looked at him across the oak desk that had cost her $1 and which had proven to be exactly as solid as he had claimed. "You have seen the office," she said. "You were here when the sign went up." "That was 3 weeks ago," he said. "It looks different now. With the furniture and it looks like what it is." Rosa looked around the room. It did look like what it was. That was, she thought, exactly right. "Friedrich's associate," she said. "The lion investor. That's a real inquiry." "Friedrich mentioned it in a letter," Callum said. "I wasn't sure whether to respond or wait for you to review the French correspondence first." He paused. "I was also, if I'm being direct, looking for a reason to come in." "You don't need a reason to come in," she said. "You own the building." "I lease it to you," he said. "There's a difference. You told me that." Rosa looked at him. He looked back at her. The morning light came through the window behind her, and the office was quiet. And outside, she could hear the ordinary sounds of the ranch going about its business. And in the chair across from her desk sat a man who had given her the space to build something real and kept finding legitimate adjacent reasons to be near it. And she understood with the precision she brought to everything. She understood exactly what that meant. "Callum," she said. "Rosa," he said. First name. He had not used it before. He said it with the careful attention of a man who understood that language had weight and had chosen this word deliberately. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I'm not interested in being someone's reward," she said. "I'm not interested in being rescued or accommodated or handled carefully because I've been through something difficult. I've been through difficult things my whole life, and I've managed them without being handled." She looked at him steadily. If what this is something else. Something that's about the work I do and the person I am, and not the situation we went through together, then I'm interested in discussing it." Callum was quiet for a long moment. He was the kind of man who understood that there were sentences that required the full weight of your attention before you responded to them. This was one. "You argued with me on the second day," he said, "about how to organize the correspondence archive. You told me I was wrong about the chronological method, and you were right, and I needed to accept that and move forward." "You were wrong," Rosa said. "The thematic organization by document type was more efficient for the pattern we were looking for." "You were right," he said. "I knew you were right when you said it. And I thought," he looked at her, "I thought this is the kind of person I want to be wrong around. Because she'll tell me, and she'll be right, and she won't make me feel lesser for it." He held her gaze. "That's not rescue. That's not gratitude. That's me telling you who I am and what I'm looking for." Rosa held his gaze across the desk. She thought about every room she had ever walked into and been made smaller in. She thought about what it had taken to walk into that dining room and stay there. She thought about the office and her name on the sign and her father's photograph in the corner, and what it felt like to sit at that desk and have work that was fully hers. She thought about the specific, particular, precise feeling of being seen clearly by someone who had no interest in making her smaller. "You're still my client," she said. "I know," he said. "That doesn't change." "I wouldn't want it to," he said. "The French correspondence is real, by the way. I do have a Lyon inquiry. I'd like your help with it." "Put it on the desk," she said. He produced a letter from his other jacket pocket and placed it on the desk between them. Rosa picked it up. She began to read, and Callum sat in the chair across from her and watched her work with the expression of a man who was exactly where he intended to be. She translated the letter. She made notes in the margin. She asked him 2 clarifying questions about the nature of the potential investment and the timeline he was considering, and he answered both directly and completely, and without making her feel the questions were inconvenient. Then she drafted a response in French, read it aloud to him for his approval. Made one adjustment he suggested, and declined to make a second one, he suggested, because it was grammatically incorrect, which she explained, and which he accepted. They worked for 2 hours. Steady, focused, useful work. When they finished, Callum stood to leave. At the door, he stopped and looked back. "The same man who does signs," he said. "He does business cards, if you want them." "I know," Rosa said. "I've already ordered them." He smiled. "A full one this time, not managed." "Of course you have." He left. Rosa sat at her desk in the office with her name on the door and looked at her father's photograph in the corner and thought about the word her father had used the first time she had translated something difficult and gotten it exactly right. He had not said "well done," or "that was impressive," or "I'm proud of you." He had said simply, "That's it. That's the work. That's it. That's the work." She picked up the next document on her desk and began. Outside Red Willow Ranch moved through its afternoon in the ordinary way of a working enterprise that has survived an attempt to destroy it and has come through more solid than it began. The sound of it steady and purposeful. The creek running clear in its banks, the land exactly where it had always been. And in the small building on the eastern edge of that land, Rosalie Merriweather, commercial translator and contract consultant, did what she had always been capable of doing. She simply finally had the room to do it in. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, 14 months after Rosa Merriweather put a coffee pot down on a table in the Frontier House Hotel and changed the direction of everything. It came on heavy cream paper with the Frontier House letterhead, addressed to Miss Rosalie Merriweather, commercial translation and contract consultation, which was the name on her door and the name on her business cards, and the name that had traveled in 14 months from Cheyenne to Laramie, to Casper, to the cattle offices in Denver, and the investment houses in Chicago, and the commercial correspondence networks of 3 German-American business associations operating in the American West. The letter invited Miss Merriweather to attend the Wyoming Territorial International Cattle and Commerce Conference, to be held at the Frontier House Hotel over 3 days in November, as a participating professional consultant available to delegates requiring translation and contract review services. Not as staff, not as hotel personnel, as a participating professional. Rosa read the letter twice. Then she set it on her desk beside her father's photograph and looked at it for a moment in the quiet of the morning before her first client arrived. She thought about the last time she had been in that hotel, not in a professional capacity, but in the capacity of a woman carrying a coffee pot across a dining room floor, moving between tables that held men whose names meant something, and whose words were worth recording, and whose futures were worth protecting. She thought about what it had felt like to be invisible in that room. She thought about what it had cost her to stop being invisible. Then she picked up her pen and wrote her acceptance. The weeks before the conference moved fast. Rosa's client list had grown steadily across the 14 months since the office opened, steadily, not explosively in the way of a reputation built on accuracy rather than spectacle. She had developed the kind of practice her father had always described as the most durable kind. Clients who came back. Clients who sent other clients who had stopped being nervous about their foreign correspondence because they knew exactly where to take it and exactly what they would receive in return. Friedrich's retainer had held through 4 quarterly renewals. His investment operations in Wyoming had expanded, which meant his correspondence volume had expanded, which meant Rosa's workload from him alone could have kept the office busy. She had deliberately kept it from doing so, not out of ingratitude, but because she understood instinctively that a practice built on one client was a practice with one point of failure, and she had not survived everything she had survived in order to build something fragile. She had 3 ranch clients now with German freight partnerships, 2 merchant clients with ongoing German commercial correspondence, 1 banking client, a small territorial bank with German immigrant depositors who needed monthly document review and quarterly contract consultation. And she had quietly and without advertisement begun taking on a different kind of work. It had started with a woman named Helga Brenner. Helga had appeared at Rosa's office door on a Wednesday afternoon in February, 6 months after the office opened. She was German-born in her 30s, with strong English and excellent business sense, and a freight brokerage she had been running with her late husband for 5 years. Her husband's death had left her managing the business alone, and she had been managing it well, but she had been managing it without fully understanding 3 long-term contracts that her husband had signed in German with Hamburg suppliers before he died, contracts whose terms she suspected were no longer favorable, but which she had been afraid to challenge because she wasn't certain what they actually said. Rosa read the contracts. She told Helga exactly what they said. She told her which terms were unfavorable, which terms were negotiable, and what leverage Helga had based on her payment history and the current freight market conditions. She translated Helga's response letters into German, reviewed the Hamburg suppliers' counterproposals, and sat with Helga through 2 rounds of renegotiation until the contracts were terms Helga understood completely and could defend confidently. Helga sent Rosa 3 clients in the following month. All women. All managing businesses or estates with foreign language documentation. They had been afraid to confront, because confronting them required a professional, and the professionals they could access had made them feel in various ways that their situations were beneath serious consideration. Rosa took all 3 cases. Then she took more. By the time the conference invitation arrived, approximately 1/3 of Rosa's practice was this kind of work: women and immigrants with legitimate commercial needs and no professional access, people who had been managing important documents through guesswork because the qualified professionals available to them had decided on the basis of appearance or accent or social position that their situations didn't warrant real attention. Rosa gave them real attention. The same methodical, accurate, complete attention she had given Callum's ranch records and Friedrich's investment correspondence and the timber merchants' partnership agreements. The same 3-reading method her father had taught her. The same 3-column documentation. The same plain, honest explanation of what documents actually said versus what people had assumed they said. She charged fair rates. Not reduced rates, fair rates, the same rates she charged everyone, because reduced rates were a form of condescension, and she had received enough condescension in her life to understand exactly what it felt like and declined to replicate it. Callum knew about this part of her practice. He had found out the way he found out most things about what Rosa was doing, not because she told him directly, but because he listened carefully when she did speak and asked good questions and paid attention to the answers. He had come into the office one morning in March to drop off a French telegram that was this time actually a French telegram requiring actual translation, and Rosa had been finishing a meeting with a woman named Marta Schiller, who was Hungarian-born and ran a seamstress business and had been trying for 2 years to understand a lease agreement she had signed in English without fully comprehending it. Rosa had explained the lease in plain language, identified a renewal clause that Marta had not known existed, and sent her away with a written summary she could reference without needing to return. Callum had waited until Marta left. Then he looked at Rosa. "How long has that been going on?" he said. "Since February," Rosa said. "Helga Brenner sent her." "You're building something bigger than a translation office," he said. "I'm building exactly what I said I was building," Rosa said. "A translation office. The clients are the clients." But she knew what he meant. And she knew he was right. And she had been thinking about it for months, the way the practice was naturally organizing itself into something with a larger structure than she had initially articulated, something that looked less like a single professional service and more like the beginning of a system. A way of connecting language-capable people with commercial opportunities that language barriers had been keeping out of reach. She had not said this out loud to anyone yet. She was still learning its shape herself. But it was there, growing in the back of her mind, the way the best ideas grew, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, accumulating clarity. She was still thinking about it the morning she arrived at the Frontier House Hotel for the conference. She had been back to the hotel twice since the hearing, once for a client meeting, once to collect a document that had been delivered there in error. Both times, she had entered through the front door as a visitor, and the experience had been unremarkable in the specific way that unremarkable things are when they represent a change you have worked very hard for. This time was different. She came through the front door with her professional portfolio under her arm and her name on the conference registration list, and the particular internal steadiness of a woman who has had 14 months to practice being exactly herself in rooms that weren't designed for her. The conference registration desk was staffed by 2 young women she didn't recognize. She gave her name. One of them found it on the list, smiled in a way that indicated the name meant something to her, and handed Rosa her credentials and the conference materials. Rosa pinned the credentials to her dress. Rosalie Merriweather Commercial Translation and Contract Consultation. She picked up her portfolio and walked into the conference. The main hall was full. Ranchers and investors and attorneys and commercial representatives from across Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, and 3 eastern states, plus a German delegation that Rosa could identify by their bearing and their clothing, and the quiet, efficient way they were managing the language gap. Friedrich was with the German delegation. He saw Rosa the moment she entered and raised his hand in a greeting that was brief and genuine, and communicated in its brevity. A professional regard that had only deepened across 14 months of working together. She had been in the hall for approximately 4 minutes when she heard it. Not loud, not directed at her specifically. A comment exchanged between 2 men near the registration desk, both of whom were watching the room with the assessing posture of men who had been here before and were categorizing the newcomers. "That's Merriweather," one of them said. "The translator, the one from the Shaw case." "I heard about that," the other said. "Took down a whole railroad syndicate." "She did," the first man said. "Single-handedly identified the fraud." Rosa kept walking, but she had heard it, and what she had heard was not the version of herself she had been carrying for most of her life, the version that was defined first by what she looked like, and second, if there was time and interest, by anything else. What she had heard was the version of herself that she had been building for 14 months, document by document, client by client, meeting by meeting. It didn't make her invulnerable. She knew that. The other version was still out there and always would be. The looks, the assessments, the moments in rooms where someone's eyes traveled over her before their ears registered her words. Those moments did not disappear because she had won a court case. People were people, and that particular habit of judgment ran deep and old, and would not be cleared away by one woman's 14 months of excellent work. But the room was bigger now. The version of herself that existed in the room was bigger, and that Rosa thought was the work. Not the elimination of the obstacle, the expansion of the territory beyond it. She found her assigned consultation table, set down her portfolio, and arranged her materials with the methodical precision that was simply how she worked. She had 3 scheduled consultation appointments in the morning session, and an open afternoon for walk-in inquiries. She had brought her full documentation kit, writing pad, 3 sharpened pencils, reference materials for German and French commercial terminology, her 3-column template for discrepancy documentation. The first consultation was a rancher from Montana with a German equipment supplier he'd been working with for 3 years and had never quite trusted because he could never fully verify what his import agent was telling him the invoices said. Rosa reviewed 6 months of invoices in 40 minutes, confirmed that the import agent's translations had been accurate, identified one clerical error in the rancher's favor that he had never caught, and gave him a clear methodology for reviewing future invoices himself. He left looking like a man who had just had a weight taken off his back. The second consultation was more complicated. A Colorado cattle broker with a French investment partner whose partnership agreement had been drafted in English, but whose handwritten amendments added in subsequent meetings were in French and had never been formally incorporated into the main document. Rosa identified 3 amendments that significantly altered the profit-sharing terms and 2 that affected the termination conditions. The broker's expression went through several stages during her explanation, ending in the particular focused seriousness of a man who has just understood that he needs a lawyer and needs one immediately. She gave him Webb's name. The third consultation of the morning was a woman. This was not unusual. Rosa had developed enough of a reputation with female clients that 1 or 2 typically appeared at any professional gathering she attended. But this woman was different in a way that Rosa registered immediately and spent the first 2 minutes of their conversation trying to precisely identify. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was in her 50s, with the bearing of someone who had navigated considerable social difficulty and emerged from it with her self-possession intact. She had managed her late brother's cattle import business for 3 years. Since his death, managed it successfully. Her account books were excellent. Her supplier relationships were solid, but she had been operating under a licensing arrangement whose terms she had never been able to verify because the original agreement had been negotiated in German by her brother before he died, and she had been afraid that if she asked too many questions about it, the suppliers would realize she didn't fully understand her own legal position and use that uncertainty against her. Rosa listened to all of this without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you have the document with you?" Eleanor Marsh produced it from her own portfolio. It was a long document, densely written in German commercial script. Rosa read it carefully, all 17 pages, making notes in her 3-column format. It took 25 minutes. Eleanor Marsh waited with the composed patience of a woman who had learned to wait for things she needed. When Rosa finished, she looked up. "Your licensing terms are favorable," she said. "More favorable than you've probably assumed because you've been negotiating from a position of uncertainty. Your suppliers know what the document says, and you didn't, and that imbalance has been costing you." She turned the document around and showed Eleanor the relevant clauses. "You have price protection for another 4 years. You have a right of first refusal on supply expansion that your suppliers have been hoping you wouldn't claim. And you have a termination penalty clause that works heavily in your favor if they try to break the agreement early." Eleanor Marsh looked at the document. She looked at Rosa. "For 3 years I've been managing blind," Rosa said, not unkindly. "It's more common than you think. The language gap is used deliberately by people who benefit from the other party's uncertainty. The solution is accurate information, which you now have." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Where were you 3 years ago?" "In a hotel dining room," Rosa said, "carrying coffee." Eleanor looked at her. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition of a specific kind, the recognition that passes between women who have navigated similar kinds of invisibility from different directions. "What would you charge?" Eleanor said slowly, "to do a quarterly review of my correspondence ongoing?" Rosa named a quarterly rate. Eleanor accepted it without negotiating, which told Rosa the rate was fair. They shook hands across the consultation table, and that handshake was, Rosa thought, its own kind of document binding clear mutual. The afternoon brought 7 walk-in inquiries, which was more than she had expected, and which kept her at the consultation table until the hall began to clear. She handled each one with the same full attention she brought to every case. No case was beneath her. No question was stupid. No client was too small. Those were rules she had made for herself and kept. She was organizing her materials at the end of the afternoon when she became aware of a change in the room, a shift in the direction of attention that had nothing to do with her. She looked up. Shaw was standing at the entrance to the hall. Not Shaw in custody. Shaw in a good suit with the composed expression of a man who had navigated a legal situation and emerged on the far side of it and was now testing the social terrain. Rosa understood in the instant she saw him that he had not faced the consequences she had assumed he would face. The fraud charges she had received a letter from Webb 2 months ago, noting that the syndicate's attorneys had reached a settlement with the territorial court that had resulted in fines and professional censure, but not criminal conviction. Shaw had cooperated with the syndicate's settlement process and had been released from liability in exchange for his testimony, which was the legal outcome, and which Rosa had accepted as what legal outcomes sometimes were. But he was here, in this hotel, at this conference, and he had seen her. He crossed the room at her with the measured deliberation of a man who has decided something and is committed to seeing it through. Rosa set down her portfolio and stood and waited with the specific stillness she had developed for situations that required her not to move first. He stopped on the other side of the consultation table. "Miss Merriweather," he said. "Mr. Shaw," she said. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the conference credentials on her dress. He looked at this consultation table and the materials arranged on it, and the 8 completed intake forms from the afternoon's walk-in clients stacked neatly at the corner. "You've done well," he said. The tone was not what she expected. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't the practiced dismissal of a man who needed to make her small. It was something more complicated and less comfortable, the tone of a man saying something true that he would prefer not to have to say. "I've done the work," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you." He stopped, reconsidered, started again. What I did in that dining room. It would have cost this man. He glanced in the direction of the main conference area, where Callum was visible in conversation with 3 ranchers near the far wall. It would have cost him everything. Yes, Rosa said. It would have. And you stopped it. I translated accurately, she said. That's all I did. Shaw looked at her. He looked. She thought like a man who had spent 14 months with something sitting on him, and had finally decided to put it down, regardless of whether the putting down accomplished anything beyond the setting down itself. I underestimated you, he said, in a way that He stopped again. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a conversation or anything beyond. He looked at her directly. I wanted to say it to your face. You were in that room, and I decided what you were before you opened your mouth, and I was wrong, and what came from that. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Rosa looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about what her father would have said, which was probably precise and measured, and entirely without cruelty. She thought about what was actually true. You made a mistake that plenty of people make, she said. You looked at me and decided you already knew what I was. The difference is that your mistake had consequences that most people's don't, because you were in a position where it affected other people. She held his gaze. I don't carry it. But I want you to understand something. The people who come to my office, the women with foreign language documents, they're afraid to question the immigrants who sign things they don't fully understand, because no qualified professional will take their case seriously. They're paying the same kind of price you nearly made Callum Rourke pay. Every day. Because someone in a position of professional trust looked at them and made the same calculation you made about me. Shaw was very still. That's what I'm trying to change, Rosa said. Not by punishing anyone, by making accurate information available to people who deserve it and haven't had access to it. She picked up her portfolio. If that means anything to you, use it. If it doesn't, that's your business. She walked away from the table. Callum was at her side before she had crossed half the room. He had been watching. Of course he had been watching. He was Callum, and watching was how he stayed ahead of things. You all right? He said. Yes, she said. And this time, it was simply true, without the qualification she had added 14 months ago in the courthouse. She was all right. She was, in fact, more than all right. She was exactly where she had worked to be, and she had just said plainly, and without heat, exactly what she believed. And the saying of it had felt like the final document in a case file, the one that completed the record. What did he say to you? Callum said. He said he underestimated me. He did. Yes, Rosa said. But I told him something more useful than that. I told him what I'm doing with it. Callum looked at her. In the way he had of looking at her direct without interference, like someone who has decided the person in front of them is worth his full attention and intends to give it. Tell me, he said. So, she told him. Right there in the conference hall with the noise of the evening session starting up around them, and Friedrich catching her eye from across the room, and nodding once, and returning to his conversation, she told Callum what she had been building toward, and hadn't yet said to anyone in its full shape. She told him about Helga Brenner, and Marta Schiller, and Eleanor Marsh, and the 7 walk-in clients from today, and the pattern she had seen accumulating across 14 months of practice. The same gap presenting itself in case after case, the same structural exclusion of the same categories of people from access to accurate information about their own commercial situations. She told him she wanted to formalize it. Not just take the cases as they came, but build something deliberate, a program, a structure, a way of training other people who had language skills and commercial knowledge and no professional access to put those skills to use. She told him she needed space. More space than the assay office. She needed a room where she could teach, not just consult. Callum listened to all of it without interrupting, in the way she had come to understand was simply how he listened to things that mattered. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The old assay building, he said, has a second structure behind it. We used it for equipment storage when we were running the mineral surveys. It's bigger than the front building, 2 large rooms. He paused. It's been empty for 3 years. Rosa looked at him. What are you charging for it? What do you think is fair? I think I should name a number, and you should tell me if it's acceptable. The corner of his mouth moved. Name it. She named it. He accepted it. No hesitation. I'll have it cleared this week, he said. Don't clear it yourself, she said. I'll arrange the clearing. It's my office space. I know, he said. I was going to hire someone. Give me the name, she said. I'll hire them. He gave her the name. She wrote it in her notebook. He watched her write it with the expression he had, the quiet, serious one, the one that was not managed and not performed. Rosa, he said. She looked up. I'm going to ask you something, he said. And if the answer is no, the lease stands, and the second building stands, and the work stands, and nothing changes. She waited. A year from now, he said. Maybe 2. When the office is what you're building it toward, and the program is running, and you've trained the first group of translators, and the practice is fully yours, and nobody can take it when that's done. He looked at her. I'd like to know if there's still room for something else. Between us. Not because of the case or the ranch or anything that's already happened. Because of you. The way you work, and the way you think, and the way you looked at me in that dining room like I was just a man making a mistake and told me so. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. She thought about all the ways she could answer this. She thought about the walls she had built over 29 years that had been necessary and useful, and which she did not regret, and which were also, she understood clearly, walls. She thought about what it meant to let someone see the full reach of who you were and have them say, "That's what I want." Ask me in a year, she said, and I will give you an honest answer. That's enough, he said. And he meant it completely without reservation in the way he meant things. 1 year later, almost to the day, Rosa Merriweather stood on the porch of the building she now called her office and training room, and watched the first 4 women she had trained in commercial translation complete their first independent client consultations through the window. They were different women, different ages, different backgrounds, different languages, 2 with German, 1 with French, 1 with both. What they had in common was that they had come to Rosa with skills, and no access with knowledge, and no credential with the ability to do work that needed doing, and no room in which to do it. She had given them the room, and the methodology, and the clients carefully chosen from her existing practice clients who had agreed to be part of the training cohort, who understood that the consultation they were receiving came from a developing professional rather than a fully established one, and who had agreed to provide honest feedback rather than polite praise. Because polite praise was useless. Honest feedback was how you got better. Rosa watched through the window and recognized in the posture of each of the 4 women the straight back, the steady hands, the focused attention on the document in front of them rather than on the client's reaction. The same posture she had learned at her father's kitchen table. The posture of someone who trusts the work enough to let the work speak. Callum appeared beside her. He had been at the ranch all morning and had come down to the office in the early afternoon on the pretext of a German invoice, which this time was actually a German invoice, and which Rosa had translated in 4 minutes and handed back while he was still settling into the client chair because it was a standard equipment invoice, and she had been doing standard equipment invoices for 14 months and could do them in her sleep. He had stayed anyway. He stood beside her now and looked through the window at the 4 women working. "It's working," he said. "Yes," she said. "You knew it would." "I believed it would," she said. "That's different. Belief requires evidence. Knowing doesn't. I prefer belief." He looked at her. "That's your father talking." "Most of the good things are," she said. They stood in the quiet for a moment. Then Callum said, "It's been a year." Rosa looked at him. The October air was cool, and the ranch was going about its afternoon, and the sounds of 4 women working competently inside the building behind her were the best sounds she had heard since she signed her name to the office lease. She thought about this dining room. She thought about the coffee pot. She thought about the pen in Callum's hand, and the 4 words she had said, and the 14 months that had followed them, and everything she had built in that time, built herself with her own hands and her own mind, and the methodology her father had given her, and the stubbornness she had come by honestly. She thought about this man beside her, who had given her space and fair terms and honest attention and had asked her 1 year ago for a year. She looked at him directly. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. "Is there room?" "Yes," she said. "There is." He took her hand. She let him. They stood together on that porch while the ranch moved through its afternoon, and the 4 women inside completed their consultations, and the creek ran where it had always run, clear and uninterrupted, exactly where it belonged. Friedrich sent a letter the following week from his winter offices in Chicago. It was brief. Friedrich's letters were always brief, and it said that his Hamburg associate had inquired about Rosa's training program after word had reached him through the German-American commercial networks, and that 3 German investment firms operating in the American West were interested in partnering with the program to provide certified translation services for their ongoing Wyoming and Colorado operations, and that Friedrich expected Rosa's terms for this partnership to be characteristically fair and non-negotiable. Rosa sat at her desk and read the letter twice, and then drafted a response that was 3 pages single-spaced, outlining her terms for the partnership in precise and comprehensive detail, because that was how she wrote agreements and always had been. She sent it. All 3 firms accepted. She hired her 2nd staff translator in January, her 3rd in March. By the following summer, the program had trained 11 women and placed 7 of them in ongoing commercial translation work across the territory. Work that paid fair professional rates and came with the kind of documented case files and professional references that could be used to build a lasting practice. None of them were invisible. The work made that impossible. When you stood in a room with complete command of the language being spoken and the documents being signed, when the parties across the table needed what you had and could not proceed without it, visibility was not a choice or a gift or a thing that required permission. It was simply the natural consequence of being the person the room could not function without. That had been Rosa's discovery in the dining room of the Frontier House Hotel on August 14, 1887, when she put the coffee pot down and opened her mouth. Not that she was brave, not that she was special, not that the world had finally charitably decided to see her, but that the world was full of rooms where someone was saying something important in a language the people in power didn't understand, and that the woman with the coffee pot, the woman they had looked through, the woman they had dismissed before she ever spoke, was the only person in the room who could make the truth impossible to ignore. She had not changed herself to earn her place in those rooms. She had not become smaller or quieter or more palatable or easier to accept. She had simply done what she had always been capable of doing in a room that had been forced finally to stop talking long enough to hear her. And everything that had come after the office, the program, the partnership, the 4 women working through their first independent consultations, the man who had asked her for a year and to whom she had said yes, all of it had begun in the same place, with the same action, the same 4 words. Not with rescue, not with permission, not with anyone finally deciding she was worthy. With a woman who knew something true and refused to stay quiet and changed everything.